I packed my things and disappeared after my wife slapped me at her birthday dinner table in front of her friends and family. For years later, I was invited in my hometown for an exclusive meeting of millionaire elites. When I landed, I got the shocking news about my wife that, you know that feeling when you're standing on the edge of a cliff, thinking you're about to jump into something beautiful, only to realize you're falling into your own grave? Yeah, that was me on March 15th, planning what I thought would be the perfect night for Delilah's 36th birthday. I'd been working on this thing for months, man. Not weeks, months. Every single detail had to be flawless because that's what Delilah deserved. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself while I was dropping serious cash on stuff that would probably bankrupt most normal people. The rooftop venue alone cost me $3,000, but it wasn't just any rooftop. This was the penthouse terrace at the Meridian, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the whole city. You could see the river snaking through downtown, all those lights twinkling like diamonds scattered across black velvet. It was the kind of view that made people shut up and just stare, you know? The wine? Don't even get me started on the wine. I flew in cases of this French stuff. Chateau something or other that the wine guy swore was absolutely transcendent. Cost me $400 a bottle, and I bought enough to make sure everyone could get properly buzzed without us running out. I'm talking about the good stuff here, not some cheap grocery store wine that tastes like it was filtered through a gym sock. Then there was the quartet. Real musicians, not some college kids looking to make beer money. These guys had played at symphony halls and fancy weddings for celebrities whose names you'd definitely recognize. They set up in the corner with their instruments gleaming under the string lights I'd had installed specifically for this night. The violinist had this way of making his instrument sing that gave you chills, and when they played Delilah's favorite song, that old jazz number she always hummed in the shower, I swear I almost teared up thinking about how perfect her reaction was going to be. The cake was its own masterpiece. 3 tiers of this fancy Belgian chocolate stuff, custom designed with edible gold leaf, and these sugar flowers that looked so real you'd think someone had just picked them from a garden. The baker, this artsy woman who charged like she was Michelangelo or something, spent weeks getting the details just right. It was supposed to represent Delilah's journey, her love for art, her dreams of traveling, all that stuff she talked about when we'd stay up late planning our future together. I had everything mapped out like a military operation. The guests would arrive at 7, mingle with cocktails while watching the sunset paint the sky, all those crazy colors. The quartet would start playing right as the last bit of daylight faded, creating this magical atmosphere that would make everyone feel like they were in some romantic movie. Then we'd move to dinner, catered by that upscale place downtown that always had a waiting list longer than my arm. After that, the cake, the speeches, and hopefully Delilah looking at me like I was the greatest guy who ever lived. But life's got this twisted sense of humor, doesn't it? When the moment came for Delilah to give her thank you speech, I was standing there grinning like an idiot, waiting for her to mention how I'd pulled all this together. She thanked her sister Bianca for always being there. She thanked her mom for raising her right. She thanked her friends for making life worth living. She even thanked the damn waitstaff for their service. But me? The guy who'd been planning this thing since Christmas, who'd stressed over every detail, who'd blown through his savings account to make her dreams come true for one night. Nothing. Not even a glance in my direction. That's when something inside me started to crack. Not break. Just crack, like when you drop a glass, but it doesn't shatter right away, just sits there with these hairline fractures running through it, waiting for the next hit to finish the job. You know what? Delilah said, her voice cutting through the music and conversation like a knife. There's something that's been bothering me all night. She was looking right at me now, but not in the way I'd been hoping for. Her eyes had that cold look I'd seen before, usually right before she was about to tear into someone for disappointing her. The whole vibe here feels off, like someone's trying too hard to impress people instead of just letting things happen naturally. I felt my stomach drop. Everyone was staring now, the conversations dying out one by one as people sensed drama brewing. The quartet kept playing, but it felt weird, like background music for a car crash. I mean, seriously, she continued, gesturing around at all the stuff I'd carefully arranged. This whole setup screams desperation. It's like someone watched too many movies and thought they could buy their way into being romantic. That's when she walked over to me, her heels clicking on the rooftop tiles like a countdown timer. I thought maybe she was going to whisper something, apologize for being harsh, tell me she was just overwhelmed by everything. Instead, she pulled back and slapped me so hard my ears rang. The sound echoed across the rooftop like a gunshot. Then came the laughter, not from everyone, but from enough people to make it feel like the whole world was pointing and laughing at the guy who'd tried too hard and failed spectacularly. Her sister Bianca had this smirk on her face like she'd been waiting for this moment all night. Her mom just shook her head with disappointment, like I was some kid who'd broken something valuable. I could have said something, could have defended myself, pointed out everything I'd done, made a scene right back. But what was the point? Standing there with my face burning and my pride in pieces, I realized something that probably should have been obvious way earlier. You can't make someone love you by throwing money at them, and you definitely can't fix a broken relationship with fancy parties. So I did the only thing that made sense. I straightened my jacket, looked around at all those faces staring at me like I was some kind of circus act, and walked away without saying a word. Not to Delilah, not to anyone. I just left my own girlfriend's birthday party like a ghost dissolving into the night. That same night, while she was probably still up there celebrating my humiliation, I packed everything that mattered into 2 suitcases, grabbed my external hard drives with all my work files, cleaned out my savings account, and drove out of town. I didn't leave a note, didn't make any dramatic goodbye calls. I just vanished from their lives like I'd never existed in the first place. Sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't revenge. It's disappearing so completely that they realize what they lost only after it's way too late to get it back. You ever just drive until you run out of gas, both literally and figuratively? That's exactly what I did. 3 days of white-knuckling the steering wheel, surviving on gas station coffee, and those nasty convenience store burritos that taste like cardboard wrapped in disappointment. I kept driving west until I hit Oregon, where the rain falls like it's got nothing better to do and nobody asks too many questions about why you showed up with everything you own crammed into the back of a Honda Civic. The name change wasn't some elaborate spy movie thing. It was surprisingly simple, actually. Damon Cross. Had a nice ring to it, didn't it? Strong but not flashy, memorable but not suspicious. I picked it because it sounded like someone who could disappear into a crowd but still get things done when it mattered. Plus, getting new documents isn't as hard as you'd think when you know the right people and have cash in hand. Turns out there's a whole underground economy of folks who specialize in helping people start over, no questions asked. I ended up in this little town called Cedar Falls, population maybe 8,000 on a good day. The kind of place where everyone waves at strangers, and the biggest excitement is when they change the flavor of the month at the ice cream shop. Found myself a tiny apartment above this old bookstore called Frederick's Literary Haven. The place smelled like old paper and coffee, with creaky wooden floors that announced your every move. Frederick himself was this sweet old dude, probably pushing 70, with wild Einstein hair and glasses held together with electrical tape. Guy had more books crammed into that store than most libraries, stacked floor to ceiling in no particular order that made sense to anyone but him. He rented me the upstairs space for next to nothing, just $400 a month, utilities included. When I handed him the first month's rent in cash, he just nodded and said, "We all got our reasons for needing a fresh start, son. Long as you don't burn the place down or blast music after 10, we'll get along just fine." That man never asked me a single personal question in all the time I lived there. Not where I came from, not why I paid everything in cash, not why someone my age was content living above a dusty bookstore in the middle of nowhere. He'd just make me coffee in the mornings and recommend books he thought I'd like. Sometimes we'd sit on the front porch in the evenings, him reading his newspaper and me staring out at the mountains, both of us comfortable with the silence. But I wasn't planning on staying comfortable forever. See, I had this burning need to prove something, to myself, to Delilah, to everyone who'd laughed that night on the rooftop. During the day, I took whatever work I could find. Construction mostly. Roofing jobs that left my back screaming and my hands raw. Electrical work that required crawling through attics that felt like ovens in the summer. Moving jobs where I'd haul people's entire lives from one place to another, thinking about how I'd done the same thing with my own life. Except I was moving away from everything instead of towards something new. The work was hard, but it was honest, and more importantly, it was anonymous. Nobody cares about your backstory when you're up on a roof hammering shingles or running wire through walls. They just care that you show up on time, work hard, and don't steal their tools. I was good at all three, so word got around that Damon Cross was reliable. That meant steady work, steady money, and steady progress toward whatever the hell I was building. But the real work happened at night. After 10 hours of manual labor, when my muscles were screaming and most normal people would be crashing in front of the TV, I'd crack open my laptop and dive into the world I'd left behind. Finance, coding, digital marketing, all the stuff I'd dabbled in before but never taken seriously. Now it was my lifeline, my ticket to something bigger than just getting by. I started small, watching YouTube videos about cryptocurrency and reading every finance blog I could find. Lost my shirt on some stupid altcoin investment in month 3, dropped $2,000 on something called Moondoge that crashed harder than my relationship with Delilah. Got scammed by some fake trading platform that took another $1,500 before I realized what was happening. But you know what? Every failure taught me something. Every mistake made me smarter, more careful, more determined. By year 2, I wasn't just learning anymore, I was earning. Started flipping houses, buying these rundown properties that nobody wanted and turning them into something people would actually want to live in. Nothing fancy, just solid work that added value. I'd buy a place for $30,000, put in another $20,000 in materials and sweat equity, and sell it for $60,000. Simple math, steady profits. The crypto thing finally started paying off too, once I stopped chasing get-rich-quick schemes and started treating it like actual investing. Set up shell companies to keep everything clean and legal, diversified my portfolio, played the long game instead of trying to hit home runs every time. Turns out patience and discipline beat gambling every single time. By year 4, I was the silent partner behind 2 online consulting firms. Never showed my face, never used my real name, but I was the guy making the strategies that turned failing businesses into success stories. Companies would hire my firms to fix their marketing, streamline their operations, boost their profits. They'd never know that the mastermind behind their turnaround was some guy living above a bookstore in Oregon, but that was exactly how I wanted it. I didn't exist on paper anymore. Silas Ward was a ghost, a memory that probably only lived in Delilah's mind when she was feeling nostalgic or guilty. But Damon Cross? That guy was building something real, something that mattered, something that nobody could take away with a slap and some cruel laughter. For years of disappeared felt like a lifetime, but also like I was just getting started. You know that moment when you're cruising along, thinking you've finally got life figured out, and then the universe decides to remind you that you're not the one writing the script? That's exactly what happened on a Tuesday morning in March, for years after I'd vanished into thin air. I was sitting in Frederick's bookstore, nursing my second cup of coffee and reading some financial reports on my laptop, when he shuffled over with this weird look on his face. The old man had this stack of mail in his hands, but he was holding one envelope like it might explode if he breathed on it wrong. "This came for you," he said, setting it down on the table next to my coffee mug. "Came to the P.O. box, but there's something off about it." I looked at the envelope and immediately felt this cold sensation creep up my spine. The thing was expensive, thick, cream-colored paper that probably cost more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. My alias was written across the front in this perfect calligraphy that looked like it came from some fancy wedding invitation. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. There was no return address. No postmark. No stamp. Nothing. How'd this get to the post office without a stamp? I asked Frederick, but he just shrugged and walked away, muttering something about how the postal service wasn't what it used to be. I sat there staring at this thing for probably 10 minutes, turning it over in my hands like I was handling evidence from a crime scene. See, when you've spent 4 years building a completely anonymous life, when you've been more careful than a paranoid drug dealer about keeping your tracks covered, you get real suspicious when mysterious letters show up with your fake name on them, especially when they arrive through channels that don't make any logical sense. I finally worked up the nerve to open it, using my coffee shop knife to slice through the wax seal. Yeah, there was an actual wax seal, like we were living in some Victorian novel or something. Inside was this single sheet of paper, same expensive stock as the envelope, with maybe 50 words printed in that same perfect calligraphy. "Mr. Cross," it read, "your reputation in certain circles has not gone unnoticed. We cordially invite you to attend an exclusive summit for emerging global investors. Location, The Grandview Resort, Riverview. Date: March 20th to 22nd. Your participation would be valued. Accommodations have been arranged. Simply present this invitation upon arrival. That was it. No signature, no organization name, no contact information. Just this cryptic invitation to some high-roller meeting in my old hometown, happening on the exact same weekend as Delilah's birthday. My hands started shaking, and not from the caffeine. Riverview. The place I'd fled from 4 years ago with my tail between my legs and my heart shattered into a million pieces. The place where I'd been humiliated in front of everyone who mattered to Delilah, where I'd learned the hard way that love doesn't mean squat when someone decides you're not worth their respect. The place I'd sworn I'd never set foot in again, no matter what. But here's the thing about the universe. It's got this sick sense of timing. March 20th was Delilah's 37th birthday. The weekend of the 22nd would be right around the anniversary of that disaster on the rooftop, when my whole world had come crashing down over some imported wine and a custom cake. I read the invitation probably 20 times, looking for clues, trying to figure out who could possibly know about Damon Cross and his reputation in certain circles. I'd been so careful, so methodical about keeping my business dealings anonymous. My shell companies were registered in different states. My consulting work was done through encrypted channels. My real estate flips were handled through intermediaries who'd never met me face to face. But someone knew. Someone had connected the dots between the nobody who'd disappeared from Riverview and the somebody who was quietly making waves in the investment world. Someone with enough resources to track me down, enough influence to get an unstamped letter delivered to my P.O. box, and enough nerve to invite me back to the scene of my greatest humiliation. The more I thought about it, the more that old familiar chill settled into my bones. It was the same feeling I'd had that night on the rooftop, right before everything went sideways. Like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark, not knowing if the next step would be solid ground or a 1,000-foot drop. I spent the rest of that day pacing around the bookstore, driving Frederick crazy with my restless energy. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to throw the invitation in the fireplace and pretend it never happened. I'd built a good life in Oregon. Quiet, successful, drama-free. Why risk all of that by walking back into whatever web someone was spinning for me? But there was this other voice, the one that had been whispering in the back of my mind for 4 years. The voice that wondered what had happened to everyone I'd left behind. The voice that wanted to know if Delilah ever thought about me, if she ever regretted that night, if she'd figured out what she'd thrown away when she decided I wasn't worth her gratitude. That night, I made a decision that probably would have seemed crazy to anyone who knew the whole story. I booked a flight to Riverview under yet another name, Roman Bishop this time. Got myself a whole new set of documents, a credit card that traced back to one of my shell companies, even had a fake business card printed up that identified me as a private investment consultant. But here's the thing, I wasn't going back for closure. I wasn't going back to win Delilah back or to get revenge on the people who'd laughed at me. I was going back because someone had gone to a lot of trouble to get my attention, and I needed to know why. In my experience, when mysterious people start sending mysterious invitations, it usually means someone knows something you need to know. The flight was booked for March 19th, one day before Delilah's birthday, 4 years after the worst night of my life. Time to find out what the hell was really going on. You know that feeling when you step off a plane and breathe in the air of a place you swore you'd never see again? It hits you like a punch to the gut, all those memories flooding back whether you want them or not. The Riverview Airport smelled exactly the same. That weird mix of industrial cleaning supplies and overpriced coffee that somehow managed to be both sterile and comforting at the same time. I was walking through the terminal, pulling my carry-on behind me and trying to blend in with all the other business travelers, when I spotted him. Maxwell Lynn, standing by the baggage claim like he'd been waiting there for hours, holding a folded newspaper and wearing that same expensive suit he'd probably been buying in different colors for the past decade. Now, seeing Maxwell there wasn't just surprising, it was downright unsettling. This was a guy I'd met exactly once, maybe 4.5 years ago, at some networking event Delilah had dragged me to. He was one of those smooth-talking investor types who made his money by convincing other people to give him their money, you know? The kind of guy who drives a BMW he can't really afford and name-drops celebrities he's never actually met. I remembered him because I tried to warn Delilah about him afterward. Told her the guy gave me bad vibes, that something about his whole operation seemed sketchy. She'd laughed it off, said I was just being paranoid because I didn't understand sophisticated finance. Yeah, well, turns out my paranoia radar was pretty well calibrated. But what the hell was he doing at the airport, and how did he know I was going to be on that particular flight? I was traveling under the name Roman Bishop, for crying out loud. Unless someone had serious connections or serious surveillance capabilities, there was no way he should have been able to track me down. He spotted me before I could decide whether to approach him or just walk past like I didn't recognize him. Our eyes met across the terminal, and he gave me this weird little nod before walking over with purpose. The guy looked older than I remembered, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, like the past few years hadn't been particularly kind to him. Roman Bishop, he said when he got close enough, using my fake name like we were old buddies. Or should I say Damon Cross? Or maybe you prefer your original name, Silas Ward. My blood went cold. This guy knew all my identities, which meant either he was working for someone with serious resources, or he'd been tracking me a lot longer than I'd realized. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was running through escape routes and worst-case scenarios. I think you've got me confused with someone else, I said, but he just smiled and shook his head. Cut the crap, he said, pulling out that folded newspaper he'd been carrying. You need to see this. Trust me, you're going to want to sit down first. He handed me the paper. It was the Riverview Herald, dated just 2 days earlier. But it wasn't the date that made my knees go weak. It was the headline screaming across the front page in bold black letters. Local entrepreneur arrested in $7.6 million investor scam. And there, right below that headline, was a picture that made my stomach drop into my shoes. Delilah. My Delilah. Except she looked nothing like the confident, put-together woman who'd slapped me on that rooftop 4 years ago. This version of her was in handcuffs, being led away by federal agents. Her makeup smeared and her hair disheveled, like she'd been crying for hours. I stared at that picture for probably 30 seconds before I could even process the words underneath it. The article talked about how Delilah Ward and her business partner, some guy named Jeremy Kane, had been running a fake equity firm called Trinity Investment Solutions. They'd been taking money from investors, promising huge returns on some revolutionary tech startup that didn't actually exist. Classic Ponzi scheme stuff, except they'd gotten greedy and sloppy, and the whole thing had collapsed when too many people started asking for their money back at the same time. But here's the part that made my hands start shaking. According to the article, when the feds came knocking, Delilah had tried to pin the whole thing on a silent partner who'd helped design the scam before disappearing with a chunk of the money. And the name she gave them? Silas Ward. Her ex-boyfriend who'd mysteriously vanished years earlier. She's trying to frame you, Maxwell said, watching my face as I read through the article. Told investigators you were the mastermind, that you'd convinced her to start the fake company before cutting and running when things got hot. She's claiming you took $2 million with you when you disappeared. I felt like I was going to throw up. Took me about 6 months of digging to figure out that Delilah Ward is a world-class con artist who's been using your name and reputation to legitimize her scams. But the feds don't know that. They're looking for Silas Ward, and when they find him, they're going to arrest him for fraud, money laundering, and about a dozen other federal crimes. He pulled out his phone and showed me a picture of what looked like a federal wanted poster. There was my old driver's license photo, probably pulled from some DMV database, with wanted for questioning printed underneath it in official-looking letters. So here's the thing, Maxwell continued, putting his phone away. I didn't track you down to turn you in. I tracked you down because we both got screwed by the same person, and I figure maybe we can help each other out. You need to clear your name before the feds catch up to you, and I need to get my money back from that psychotic bitch who stole it. Standing there in that airport terminal, holding a newspaper with my ex-girlfriend's mugshot on the front page and listening to a guy I barely knew explain how my life was about to get turned upside down again, I realized something important. Disappearing hadn't been enough. Building a new life hadn't been enough. As long as Delilah Ward was still breathing, she was going to keep finding ways to poison everything I touched. Time to stop running and start fighting back. You know what they say about the best laid plans? Well, turns out 4 years of paranoid preparation actually pays off when your psycho ex-girlfriend tries to frame you for federal crimes. See, I'm the kind of guy who plans for worst-case scenarios, and getting blamed for someone else's criminal stupidity definitely qualified as a worst-case scenario. The moment I left Maxwell at that airport, I was already 3 steps ahead of whatever game Delilah thought she was playing. I'd spent years building multiple identities, creating paper trails that could exonerate me, and keeping meticulous records of every business deal I'd ever made. Call it paranoia, call it smart planning. I called it my "oh shit" insurance policy, and it was about to pay dividends. First stop was my hotel room, where I fired up my encrypted laptop and accessed the digital fortress I'd built around my real identity. For years of careful documentation, every financial transaction logged and verified, every business relationship mapped out with contracts and communications. I had bank records showing exactly where my money came from and where it went. I had timestamps proving I was in Oregon during every single month that Delilah's scam was running. I had business partners who could verify my legitimate consulting work, real estate deals with public records, and a paper trail longer than most people's grocery lists. But having the evidence wasn't enough. I needed to get it in front of the right people before the federal investigation turned me into a fugitive. That's where my network came in handy. For years of flying under the radar had taught me the value of building relationships with people who could move mountains when necessary. Within 6 hours of reading that newspaper, I had lawyers in 3 different states reviewing my documentation. Not just any lawyers, the kind of high-powered defense attorneys who charge more per hour than most people make in a week and who know exactly how to make federal prosecutors listen when someone's been falsely accused. I paid them in cryptocurrency, naturally, keeping everything clean and traceable, but not necessarily tied to any particular identity. While the legal team was building my defense, I was working on the offensive strategy. See, Delilah had made one crucial mistake when she decided to drag my name through the mud. She'd underestimated exactly how connected I'd become in the 4 years since I'd disappeared. The anonymous consulting work I'd been doing hadn't just made me money. It had made me friends in very influential places. I reached out to contacts in the investment community, people who'd benefited from my strategies without ever knowing my real name. Turned out a lot of them were very interested to learn that the mysterious consultant who'd helped them make millions was the same guy getting falsely accused in the Riverview Herald. Amazing how quickly people are willing to provide character references when you've made them rich. But the real game changer was Ray Patel. She was this investigative reporter I'd helped out about 2 years earlier when she was working on a story about cryptocurrency fraud. I'd provided her with some inside information that helped her break a major story about a Ponzi scheme targeting elderly investors. She'd promised me a favor if I ever needed one, and brother, I was ready to cash in that favor. I called Ray from a burner phone, using a voice modulator app that made me sound like someone else entirely. Told her I had an exclusive story about the Delilah Ward case that would blow her mind. Within an hour, I'd sent her an encrypted file containing everything. The real timeline of my disappearance, documentation of my legitimate business activities, proof that I'd been building companies while Delilah was building scams, and most importantly, evidence that she'd been using my name and reputation to legitimize her con games long before the Fed showed up. Ray was a pit bull when she smelled a good story, and this story had everything. False accusations, corporate fraud, a mysterious businessman who'd built an empire while living under an assumed name, and a twisted ex-girlfriend trying to frame her innocent former lover for crimes he'd never committed. She worked around the clock for 36 hours straight, fact-checking every detail, interviewing sources, and building a narrative that would completely flip the script on the federal investigation. The article dropped online at exactly 6 a.m. on a Thursday morning, and by noon it was trending on every social media platform. The Ghost Builder, From Silence to Empire, read like something out of a thriller novel, except every word was backed up by documentation that would make any prosecutor think twice about pursuing charges. Ray had done more than just clear my name. She'd turned me into a folk hero. The article painted me as this brilliant entrepreneur who'd rebuilt himself from nothing after being publicly humiliated by a narcissistic girlfriend, only to have that same girlfriend try to destroy him again years later when her own criminal schemes collapsed. It was David versus Goliath, except David had 4 years to prepare and Goliath was a delusional con artist who'd finally run out of people to scam. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with support for the mystery businessman who'd been wrongfully accused. Financial news outlets picked up the story, with headlines like, "How One Man's Silent Success Story Exposed a Multi-Million-Dollar Fraud." Delilah went from being portrayed as a victim of her manipulative ex-boyfriend to being exposed as a pathological liar who'd been trading on stolen reputation for years. But the real victory came when the federal prosecutors issued a statement 3 days after Rhee's article went viral. They'd reviewed the new evidence and determined that Silas Ward was not a person of interest in the Trinity Investment Solutions case. In fact, they were now investigating how Delilah Ward had obtained and misused his personal information as part of her fraudulent scheme. Maxwell called me that night, laughing so hard he could barely speak. "Holy shit, man," he said. "You didn't just clear your name, you buried her. The feds are talking about adding identity theft and defamation to her charges. She went from looking at 5 years to looking at 15. I didn't celebrate, though. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. Delilah had spent 4 years thinking she could use my name whenever it was convenient for her schemes, never considering that someday I might be in a position to defend myself. She'd underestimated the man I'd become, and that underestimation was going to cost her everything. Standing in my hotel room that night, reading the flood of supportive messages from people who'd never met me but believed in my story, I realized something important. I wasn't running anymore. For the first time in 4 years, I wasn't hiding from my past. I was using it as a foundation for whatever came next. Delilah had tried to bury me, but all she'd done was help me dig myself out of a grave I'd been hiding in for way too long. You know that moment in movies when the mysterious stranger walks into the room and everything goes quiet? Well, real life isn't quite that dramatic, but it's pretty damn close when you've spent the last week becoming a viral sensation and then show up unannounced at the most exclusive event in town. The Grandview Resort's annual charity gala was exactly the kind of pretentious affair I used to feel intimidated by back in my old life. 500 of Riverview's wealthiest and most influential people, all dressed to the nines and pretending to care about whatever cause was fashionable this year. The kind of event where a single table cost more than most people's monthly rent, and where being seen was more important than actually seeing anything. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. Charcoal gray Armani suit, no tie, crisp white shirt open at the collar. The platinum Rolex I'd bought myself after my first $1 million real estate flip caught the light perfectly as I handed my keys to the valet. I looked like money, but not the desperate, trying too hard kind of money I used to project. This was quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you've earned every dollar and don't need to prove anything to anyone. Walking through those massive oak doors felt like stepping back in time. Except I wasn't the same man who'd left this world 4 years ago. That guy had been desperate for acceptance, hungry for validation, willing to bankrupt himself trying to impress people who didn't deserve his effort. This version of me? I was here because I wanted to be, not because I needed anything from anyone in that room. The main ballroom was exactly what you'd expect. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, tables draped in white linen with centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's cars. The usual suspects were all there, working the room like it was their job. Politicians pressing flesh, business owners making deals, socialites gossiping about who was sleeping with whom and who'd lost money on what stupid investment. I didn't announce myself, didn't make a grand entrance, or try to command attention. I just moved through the crowd like smoke, present but not pushy, visible but not desperate to be seen. Amazing how differently people treat you when you're not trying to sell them something or beg for their approval. It took maybe 20 minutes before I spotted her. Delilah was holding court near the bar, surrounded by the same circle of sycophants who'd laughed when she slapped me on that rooftop. She was wearing this stunning black dress that probably cost more than my first car, her hair done up in some elaborate style that screamed, "I spent 6 hours at the salon today." From a distance, she looked exactly like the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But I could see the cracks if I looked closely enough. The way her smile seemed forced, like she was working too hard to appear confident. The slight tremor in her hands when she lifted her wine glass. The way her eyes kept darting around the room, like she was expecting bad news to walk through the door at any moment. Which, in a way, it just had. Jeremy Kane was standing next to her, playing the part of the supportive boyfriend with his hand resting possessively on her lower back. I recognized him from the newspaper photos, tall, artificially tanned, with the kind of perfect teeth that screamed, "Trust fund baby." He was working the crowd like a seasoned politician, shaking hands and making small talk with people who probably had no idea they were chatting with an accused federal criminal. I made my way toward the bar, taking my time, letting them notice me gradually. First it was just another face in the crowd, then recognition starting to dawn, then that moment of pure shock when reality hit them like a freight train. Our eyes met across maybe 15 feet of crowded dance floor, and time just stopped. Not in a romantic movie way, more like watching a car accident happen in slow motion. Delilah's face went through about 6 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, fear, anger, and finally something that looked almost like relief. That's when she dropped her wine glass. The sound of crystal hitting marble was sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise of conversation and music. Red wine splashed across the white linen tablecloth like blood at a crime scene, and suddenly everyone in a 10-foot radius was staring at the mess. Delilah just stood there, frozen, staring at me like I was some kind of ghost who'd materialized out of her worst nightmare. Jeremy noticed the commotion and followed her gaze, his confident smile faltering when he realized what, or rather who, had caused his girlfriend to lose her composure. The guy actually took a step backward, like I was contagious or something. Smart move, considering his legal situation. I could have said something. Could have walked over and made a scene. Let everyone know that the mysterious businessman from the viral news story was standing right there in their midst. Could have confronted Delilah about her attempts to frame me, or called Jeremy out for being part of a multi-million-dollar scam. Instead, I just nodded. One small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement. That yes, I saw her. Yes, I was really there. And yes, everything had changed since the last time we'd been in the same room. That nod said everything that needed to be said. It wasn't about forgiveness or revenge or any of the dramatic emotions that probably would have driven the old me. It was about power, the quiet, unshakable kind of power that comes from knowing you've already won before the game even started. Jeremy reached for Delilah's arm, probably trying to offer comfort or support or whatever it is that criminals do when they're trying to maintain their cover. But she pushed his hand away without even looking at him, her eyes still locked on mine like she was trying to figure out if I was real or just some stress-induced hallucination. I finished my drink, top-shelf whiskey, neat, because I could afford the good stuff now, and set the empty glass on the bar. Then I walked away, moving through the crowd like I owned the place, which in a way, I guess I did. Not literally, but in terms of presence, confidence, and the kind of quiet authority that money and success tend to generate. I didn't look back. Didn't need to. The message had been delivered, loud and clear. Silas Ward was back, but he wasn't the same man who'd left. This version was stronger, smarter, and completely immune to whatever games Delilah might still be trying to play. Let her spend the rest of the evening wondering what I was planning, what I knew, and what I might do next. After 4 years of her thinking she held all the cards, it was time for her to realize that the deck had been reshuffled, and I was the one dealing now. You ever have someone from your past show up at your door looking like they've been hit by a freight train? Well, that's exactly what happened 2 nights after the gala. And let me tell you, it was both exactly what I expected and nothing like I'd imagined it would be. I was sitting in my hotel suite. Penthouse level at the Meridian, same building where I'd thrown that disastrous birthday party 4 years ago, working on my laptop and enjoying the irony of being able to afford the best room in the place. The view was incredible. The whole city spread out below me like a circuit board, all those lights twinkling in the darkness. It was the kind of view that used to make me feel small and insignificant, but now it just reminded me how far I'd climbed. The knock came at exactly 11:47 p.m. Not the confident rap of a hotel employee or the authoritative pound of law enforcement. This was hesitant, desperate, the kind of knock that says, "Please don't pretend you're not in there." I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole, but I looked anyway, just to see what 4 years and a federal fraud investigation had done to the woman who'd once been the center of my universe. Holy shit. Delilah looked like she'd been crying for hours, maybe days. Her makeup was smeared. Her hair was a mess. and she was wearing this rumpled designer dress that looked like she'd been sleeping in it. This wasn't the confident, put-together woman who'd slapped me in front of 20 people. This was someone who'd hit rock bottom and was still falling. I could have ignored her. Could have pretended I wasn't there. Let her stand in that hallway until hotel security showed up to escort her away. Part of me, the part that still remembered the humiliation, the laughter, the way she'd thrown my love back in my face, wanted to let her suffer the way she'd made me suffer. But I'm not that guy anymore. The man I'd become over the past 4 years didn't operate from a place of petty revenge. So I opened the door. "Silas," she said, and just hearing my real name from her lips after all this time hit me harder than I'd expected. "Please, I know I don't deserve this, but I need to talk to you." I didn't say anything, just stepped back and let her walk into the suite. She moved like she was afraid I might change my mind and throw her out, which honestly wasn't entirely wrong. The woman who destroyed my self-worth in front of a crowd was now standing in my penthouse suite, begging for my attention. The first thing I did was pour her a glass of water. Not wine, not champagne, just plain water from the mini fridge. She needed to hydrate more than she needed to get drunk, and besides, I wasn't about to waste good alcohol on whatever sob story she was about to feed me. She took the glass with shaking hands and drank about half of it before she could even speak. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were so red and swollen I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Jeremy turned on me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The federal prosecutors offered him a deal if he'd testify against me. He took it. Said I was the mastermind, that he was just following my lead, that I'd manipulated him into helping with the scam." I wasn't surprised. Guys like Jeremy Kane don't have loyalty in their DNA. They've got survival instincts and a willingness to throw anyone under the bus if it saves their own skin. Delilah should have seen that coming from a mile away. But then again, she'd never been great at reading people's true motivations. "I don't know who else to turn to," she continued. And then she did something that 4 years ago would have broken my heart. She dropped to her knees right there on the carpet of my hotel suite. "I know I hurt you. I know I was horrible to you that night. And I know I don't deserve your help. But please, Silas. I'm scared. I don't know what to do." The tears started then. Real tears, not the crocodile tears she used to turn on whenever she wanted something. These were the tears of someone who'd finally realized that all the bridges they'd burned were the only ways back to safety. I let her cry for maybe 5 minutes, just standing there watching this woman who'd once made me feel like I wasn't worth the air I breathed, reduced to begging on my hotel room floor. There was no satisfaction in it, no sense of vindication or justice served, just this hollow feeling, like watching a house burn down when you used to live there. When she finally looked up at me, mascara streaking down her cheeks, I told her the truth. Not the angry truth, not the bitter truth, but the simple, honest truth that had taken me 4 years to fully understand. "Delilah," I said, sitting down across from her, "I'm not angry at you anymore. I was, for a long time, but I'm not now. You know why? Because being angry at you is like being angry at a scorpion for stinging. It's just what you do. It's who you are." She started to protest, to say she'd changed, that she was different now, but I held up my hand to stop her. "The thing is," I continued, "I don't care anymore. Not about your legal troubles, not about Jeremy, not about whatever mess you've gotten yourself into this time. You didn't just lose me when you slapped me that night. You lost access to me. And that's something you'll never get back." I could see the exact moment when she realized I meant it. Her face went through this progression of emotions: hope, desperation, disbelief, and finally acceptance. She wasn't going to manipulate me, wasn't going to guilt me into helping her, wasn't going to charm her way back into my life. "You're really not going to help me?" she asked, and there was genuine surprise in her voice, like she couldn't believe someone would turn down the opportunity to rescue her. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, standing up and walking to the door. "But I'm not going to save you either. You made your choices, Delilah. Now you get to live with them." I opened the door and waited. She stood up slowly, smoothed down her dress, and tried to pull herself together. For just a moment, she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with, proud, beautiful, unbreakable. Then reality crashed back in, and she was just another person who'd burned too many bridges and run out of places to hide. She walked to the door, paused for a second like she was going to say something else, then thought better of it. The last thing she said to me was, I really did love you, you know. In my own way. I know, I replied. But your way wasn't enough. She walked out without another word, and I closed the door behind her. I didn't watch her walk down the hallway, didn't wonder where she was going or what she'd do next. That chapter of my life was finally, completely closed. You know what they say about the best revenge being success? Well, standing on that conference stage in front of 300 of the most powerful investors in the country, I finally understood what that actually meant. This wasn't about getting back at anyone. This was about showing the world who I'd become when nobody was watching. The Global Investment Summit was exactly the kind of high-level event I used to dream about attending back when I was scraping together pennies to impress Delilah. Now I was the keynote speaker, the guy everyone had come to hear from. The irony wasn't lost on me that this was happening in the same city where I'd once been humiliated, in front of people who probably remembered the pathetic story about Delilah Ward's ex-boyfriend who'd disappeared after making a scene. I'd been introduced as the enigmatic strategist behind some of this decade's most successful anonymous investment firms, which was a fancy way of saying the guy who got rich while staying invisible. The audience was paying attention before I even opened my mouth. Cell phones were tucked away, conversations had stopped, and every eye in that ballroom was focused on the stage. I started simple, no flashy opening or attention-grabbing gimmicks. Just me, a wireless mic, and the truth I'd learned over 4 years of rebuilding my life from scratch. 4 years ago, I said, letting my voice carry across the silent room, I disappeared. Not because I wanted to hide from the world, but because I needed to figure out who I was when nobody else was watching. When there was no audience to perform for, no approval to chase, no expectations to meet except my own. I could see people in the audience shifting forward in their seats. This wasn't the typical corporate motivational speech they were expecting. This was something more personal, more real. Most of you probably know the headlines by now, I continued. The false accusations, the attempt to frame me for crimes I didn't commit, the ex-girlfriend who tried to use my name to legitimize her scams. But here's what the headlines don't tell you. None of that matters. Not the betrayal, not the lies, not even the vindication when the truth came out. I paused, looking out over the crowd. I could see some familiar faces, investors who'd unknowingly hired my consulting firms, business owners who'd benefited from my strategies, even a few people I recognized from my old life in Riverview. They were all hanging on every word. What matters is what you build when nobody's applauding. Real power isn't about being seen, it's about being effective. It's about creating value when there's no crowd to cheer, solving problems when there's no credit to claim, building something meaningful when the only person who'll know you did it is you. The energy in the room was electric now. I could feel it, that moment when an audience stops just listening and starts really hearing what you're saying. I spent 4 years learning that healing doesn't come from revenge or vindication or proving other people wrong. It comes from outgrowing the need for those things. It comes from building something so solid, so real, so valuable that the opinions of people who hurt you become irrelevant background noise. I talked about the construction jobs that taught me the value of honest work, the failed investments that taught me humility, the successful deals that taught me patience. I talked about learning to find satisfaction in quiet accomplishments, about building wealth without building ego, about creating success that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or recognition. The woman who tried to frame me is facing federal charges not because I sought revenge, but because lies eventually collapse under their own weight. The partner who betrayed her did so not because I manipulated him, but because loyalty built on fraud isn't really loyalty at all. I didn't destroy their lives, they destroyed their own lives, and I just happened to be standing far enough away that the debris didn't hit me. By the time I reached my conclusion, the room was completely silent except for my voice. Success isn't about proving you were right all along. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone, including yourself. I stepped back from the microphone, and for about 3 seconds, you could have heard a pin drop. Then the applause started. Not polite conference applause, but the kind of sustained ovation that makes you understand why people chase public speaking as a career. But here's the thing. I didn't smile. I didn't wave or bow or do any of the theatrical stuff that speakers usually do. I just nodded once, the same way I'd nodded at Delilah in the gala, and walked off that stage with my head high. I could see Jeremy in the audience, sitting alone near the back, looking like he wished he could disappear into his chair. I could see some of Delilah's old friends, the ones who'd laughed when she slapped me, now looking at me with something that might have been respect or might have been fear. But I didn't stop to savor their discomfort. I'd said what I came to say, and now I was done. You know what's funny about courtrooms? They're supposed to be these intimidating places where justice gets served, but when you're sitting in the gallery watching someone you used to love get what they deserve, it just feels like watching a really sad movie that you already know the ending to. Delilah's trial lasted 3 weeks, and I showed up for exactly 1 day. The day her lawyer decided to throw a Hail Mary and try to pin everything on me. Again, some people never learn, I guess. She looked different in that defendant's chair. Smaller somehow, like the weight of her lies had finally crushed whatever was left of the confident woman who used to command every room she walked into. Her lawyer, some overpriced shark in a $1,000 suit, had obviously convinced her that playing the victim card was her only shot at avoiding serious prison time. "Your Honor," the guy said, gesturing dramatically toward where I was sitting, "my client was manipulated by a master manipulator. Silas Ward abandoned her when she needed him most, leaving her vulnerable to the influence of Jeremy Kane. The psychological trauma of that abandonment led directly to the poor decisions that brought us here today." I almost laughed. 4 years later, and she was still trying to make everything my fault. Still trying to convince people that her criminal behavior was somehow a result of my abandonment, like I'd forced her to steal $7.5 million from innocent investors. But Judge Morrison had already done his homework. The guy was in his 60s, with gray hair and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that comes from 20 years of listening to criminals make excuses for their behavior. "Counselor," he said, cutting off Delilah's lawyer mid-sentence, "Mr. Ward is not on trial here. He is not part of this case. The evidence clearly shows that he had no involvement in Trinity Investment Solutions, no knowledge of the fraudulent activity, and no contact with your client during the time period in question." That was it. The final nail in the coffin of Delilah's last desperate attempt to drag me down with her. The judge's words weren't just a legal ruling. They were an official declaration that I was innocent, that I'd never been anything but innocent, and that her attempts to frame me were exactly what they appeared to be, the desperate lies of a caught criminal. Jeremy had already flipped, of course. Took a plea deal that got him 5 years in exchange for testifying against Delilah. The guy couldn't get to the witness stand fast enough, spilling every detail about how she'd masterminded the whole thing, how she'd used my name and reputation to attract investors, how she'd convinced him that stealing millions was somehow justified because her ex-boyfriend had traumatized her. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. 6 years in federal prison, plus restitution to the victims. I watched Delilah's face when the verdict came down, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely shocked that her charm and manipulation hadn't saved her. I left the courthouse without talking to anyone, but apparently word got around that I'd been there. 3 months later, I got an email from Bianca, Delilah's sister. Subject line: "She still loves you." The message was short. "Delilah asked me to tell you she's sorry for everything. She says she still loves you and hopes someday you can forgive her. She's getting the help she needs now." I stared at that email for maybe 30 seconds, then deleted it without responding. Forgiveness wasn't something Delilah got to ask for through her sister. And love? Real love doesn't try to destroy the person it claims to care about when things get difficult. Some bridges, once burned, are meant to stay ashes. You know what real closure looks like? It's not dramatic confrontations or tearful reconciliations. It's building something meaningful with your own hands and watching it change people's lives for the better. A year after Delilah's sentencing, I did something that would have seemed impossible to the broken man who'd fled Riverview with his tail between his legs. I came back home to build something permanent. The Ward Center for Resilient Youth wasn't some vanity project or guilt-driven charity case. It was a state-of-the-art facility designed to help kids who'd been written off by everyone else. Foster kids aging out of the system, teenagers from broken homes, young people who'd made mistakes but still deserved a second chance. I funded the whole thing myself, every brick and beam, every computer and counseling session. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was packed with local politicians, business leaders, and families whose kids would benefit from the center's programs. Standing there with those oversized scissors in my hands, Looking out at a crowd that included some of the same people who'd witnessed my humiliation years earlier, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Genuine pride that had nothing to do with revenge or vindication. That's when a kid from the crowd, maybe 13 or 14, with the kind of wary eyes that come from seeing too much too young, raised his hand and asked, "Are you the man who came back stronger?" The question hit me harder than I'd expected. This kid didn't know about Delilah or the rooftop or any of the drama that had defined my old life. To him, I was just the guy who'd built something good, someone who'd figured out how to turn pain into purpose. I smiled, really smiled, probably for the first time in years. I'm the man who learned to disappear without losing himself. The local news covered the opening, but they barely mentioned the old scandal. Delilah's name had already faded from the headlines, replaced by newer stories about different criminals and fresher controversies. The reporters were more interested in the anonymous businessman who'd quietly built an empire and then used his wealth to give back to his community. Meanwhile, my name, my real name, was being engraved on plaques in boardrooms across the country. The consulting firms I'd built were thriving. The investment strategies I'd developed were being taught in business schools. The kid who'd been slapped and humiliated on a rooftop had become someone whose opinion actually mattered in rooms where real decisions got made. Sometimes I still think about that night, the imported wine, the custom cake, the laughter that followed the slap. But it doesn't sting anymore. It's just a story about someone I used to be, someone who thought he needed other people's approval to have worth. The rooftop slap didn't define me. It revealed me. It showed me who I really was when everything else got stripped away, and more importantly, it showed me who I could become when I stopped trying to be what other people wanted. The silence that followed that slap, that's where I learned to listen to my own voice. And that voice told me something important. You don't need to correct the past when you've outgrown it completely.
After the divorce, my rich wife threw me out without a cent. I went to use the old card my mother had left me, but the banker turned pale and shouted, "Sir, quickly, look at this!" I was in shock when I discovered that the rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. I remember that detail because Elena kept complaining about it, how the weather was ruining her birthday week, how the gray skies made everything feel so dreary, how she couldn't wear the new Louboutins she'd bought because the streets were flooded. She said all of this while cutting into a $200 steak at Maria, her favorite restaurant in Central Park South, the one where the waiters knew her by name and always kept her preferred table by the window available. I wasn't eating. My plate sat untouched in front of me, the food growing cold while I watched her. Really watched her. The way she laughed too loudly at something her friend Marcus said over the phone. The way she didn't even glance at me when she finally hung up. The way her diamond earrings caught the candlelight. Earrings I'd given her for our 5th anniversary, back when I still believed we were building something together. "You're not eating," she said, finally noticing me. Her voice had that edge to it, the one that always appeared when I wasn't performing my role correctly. "Are you trying to make some kind of statement, David?" I wasn't. I was just tired of being the husband she paraded around at charity galas while whispering to her friends that I was decent enough considering. Tired of living in her penthouse, sleeping in her bed, wearing clothes purchased with her family's money. Tired of being reminded in 1,000 subtle and not so subtle ways that I was a guest in her life, not a partner. "I'm fine," I said quietly, "just not hungry." She rolled her eyes, actually rolled them, like a teenager annoyed with a sergeant, and went back to her steak. The waiter appeared asking if everything was satisfactory, and Elena launched into a detailed critique of the wine pairing. Using words I'd learned meant absolutely nothing, except that she enjoyed making service workers scramble. That's when I knew. Sitting there in that overpriced restaurant, watching my wife of 7 years treat a stranger with more attention than she'd given me in months, I knew our marriage was over. Had been over probably for longer than I wanted to admit. The question wasn't whether we'd end, it was when and how much of myself I'd lose in the process. I didn't have to wait long for the answer. We didn't speak in the car ride home. Elena scrolled through Instagram, double-tapping photos of people I'd never met, people from her world, the world of trust funds and summer homes in the Hamptons, of prep schools and country clubs where memberships cost more than most people earned in a year. I'd never quite fit into that world despite 7 years of trying. My mother used to tell me that love didn't care about bank accounts. She'd say it while we sat in our small apartment in Queens, her working double shifts as a nurse while I studied for the scholarship exams that would eventually get me into a decent college. She'd say it while we ate pasta for the fourth night in a row because that's what we could afford. She'd say it with such conviction that I believed her. She was wrong. Or maybe she was right, and what Elena and I had was never love at all. The penthouse was dark when we arrived. 23rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, the kind of view that makes tourists press their faces against glass barriers and dream. I used to stand at those windows and feel like I'd made it, like the kid from Queens had somehow cracked the code, married the princess, entered the castle. Now I just felt like an imposter waiting to be found out. "We need to talk," Elena said, kicking off her heels and walking to the bar. She poured herself a scotch, Macallan 25, because of course, without offering me one. Not that I wanted it. Here it comes, I thought. "This isn't working," she continued, her back still to me. "You know it isn't working." I did know. But hearing her say it out loud made something crack open in my chest, something I'd been keeping carefully sealed for months. "What do you want, Elena?" She turned then, and I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, just a cold clinical assessment, like she was evaluating a bad investment. "A divorce," she said simply. "A clean one, quick, no drama." The word hung in the air between us. Divorce, the end of everything we'd built, or everything I thought we were building while she'd apparently been planning her exit strategy. "Okay," I said, because what else was there to say? Her eyebrows lifted slightly. She'd expected a fight, maybe. Tears, begging. But I'd learned something in 7 years of marriage to Elena Whitmore. She always got what she wanted. Fighting only prolonged the inevitable and gave her ammunition to use against you later. "Okay," she repeated. "That's it? What do you want me to say? That I'll fight for a marriage you clearly checked out of months ago? That I'll make this difficult? I won't. If you want a divorce, we'll get a divorce." Something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe, or disappointment that I wasn't giving her the scene she'd rehearsed for. Then it was gone, replaced by that same cool efficiency. "Good. My lawyer will send over the papers tomorrow. You can have Harold look them over." "Oh, wait." She smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "You can't afford Harold, can you? Well, I'm sure there are plenty of adequate attorneys who work for less." There it was. The knife slipped between the ribs so smoothly I almost didn't feel it at first. "I'll find someone," I managed. She took a sip of her scotch, studying me over the rim of the glass. "You should probably start packing. I'd like you out by the end of the week. The penthouse is in my name, obviously, as is, well, everything, really." My throat tightened. "Everything? Did you contribute to the down payment, David? The mortgage? The renovations? Do you pay the maintenance fees?" Each question was delivered with surgical precision. "No, so yes, everything." I'd known this, of course, somewhere in the back of my mind. I'd always known that nothing in this life was actually mine. But knowing it theoretically and having it laid out in such stark terms were different things. "I have some savings," I started. "Do you?" Her smile widened. "That joint account we opened when we got married? I closed it this afternoon, transferred everything to my personal account. My lawyer says it's perfectly legal. It was my money funding it anyway. You're welcome to whatever's in your old checking account from before we met. I'm sure those," she paused, pretending to calculate, "$700 will take you far." The room tilted slightly. $700. That's what 7 years of marriage had left me with. $700 and a closet full of designer clothes I'd never wanted, paid for with money that was never mine. Elena. "Oh, and David?" She set down her glass and walked toward the bedroom, pausing in the doorway. "I'd appreciate it if you were gone by Monday morning. I have someone coming over for brunch, and it would be awkward if you were still here." Someone, not even a name. Just someone. Someone who was probably already sleeping in our bed on the nights I worked late. Someone she'd been planning this escape with while I'd been naive enough to think we were just going through a rough patch. The bedroom door closed with a soft click. I stood there in the living room for a long time, staring at those windows I'd once loved, at the city spread out below like a glittering promise. From up here, New York looked beautiful, magical, like anything was possible. From where I was standing, it just looked cold. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Instead, I pulled out my old duffel bag, the one from college, worn and patched, shoved in the back of the closet behind garment bags of suits I'd never paid for, and started packing. It was amazing how little was actually mine. The clothes, hers, the watch, a gift from her parents. The laptop, purchased with her credit card. I found myself sorting through 7 years of my life and realizing I could fit what was truly mine into a single bag. Some old books, a few photos of my mother, the Columbia hoodie I'd worn so much in grad school that the letters were cracking, my phone, which I'd insisted on paying for myself, one of the few small rebellions I'd maintained. And there at the bottom of my drawer, buried under socks I'd never worn, my mother's card. I'd forgotten about it, honestly. She'd given it to me a week before she died, pressed it into my hand while she lay in that hospital bed, the cancer having eaten away everything except her determination to see me settled, cared for, safe. "Promise me you'll keep this," she'd whispered, her voice thin as paper. "Don't use it unless you absolutely have to. But keep it. Promise me, David." I'd promised, even though I didn't understand why. It was just an old bank card, worn smooth at the edges, the numbers barely visible. She'd never had much money. Nurses don't get rich, and a single mother raising a kid in New York even less so. I'd assumed whatever account it connected to held maybe a few $100s, if that. A small emergency fund she'd somehow kept hidden from her own dire emergencies. Now, sitting on the floor of a penthouse I was being evicted from, I turned the card over in my hands. The plastic was warm from being buried in the drawer. The bank's logo faded almost to nothing. Chase I could just barely make out. An account number. My mother's name embossed in raised letters. Margaret Chen. She'd gone by her maiden name after my father left, kept it even after he died. Years later, as if erasing the name Sullivan from her identity could erase the pain of being abandoned with a 2-year-old and nothing else. I'd taken her name when I turned 18, legally changed it. David Sullivan died with the man who'd created him. David Chen was my mother's son, wholly and completely. Elena had hated that, insisted I should go back to Sullivan for professional reasons. That Chen made me sound too ethnic for the circles we moved in. I'd refused, one of the few times I'd stood firm against her will. My mother had given me everything. I'd be damned if I erased her from my name. I slipped the card into my wallet, though I wasn't sure why. Habit maybe, or sentimentality, or the desperate hope that my mother, somehow, had left me something that could help me survive the next few days until I figured out what came next. The sun was rising by the time I finished packing. Gray light filtered through those expensive windows, washing everything in shades of nothing. I could hear Elena in the bedroom, her alarm going off, the sound of her morning routine beginning, shower, skincare, the ritual of constructing the perfect Elena Whitmore that the world would see. I left before she came out, didn't say goodbye. What was there to say? The streets were still wet from the rain, but it had finally stopped. I walked for hours, my duffel bag over my shoulder, my phone dying slowly in my pocket because I hadn't thought to grab my charger and it had probably been purchased with her money anyway. I'd called my friend Marcus, not her, Marcus, my Marcus, from grad school, and he'd said I could crash on his couch for a few days. Not long, he'd warned. His girlfriend was already annoyed about how small their apartment was. But a few days, enough time to figure out next steps. Except there weren't many steps to figure out. I'd been working at Elena's family's investment firm, a cushy position I'd gotten not through merit, but through marriage. That would end with the divorce, obviously. I had no real savings. $700 might cover a week in a shitty motel if I was lucky. My credit cards were all connected to accounts she'd controlled. I didn't have a car. We'd sold mine years ago because it's ridiculous to have 2 cars in Manhattan, David, and mine is nicer anyway. I'd willingly dismantled my own independence piece by piece, thinking I was building a partnership. Thinking love meant merging everything, sharing everything, becoming a unit instead of two separate people. I'd been an idiot. By noon, I found myself standing outside a Chase Bank branch in Midtown. I don't know what made me walk in, desperation maybe, or the vague thought that I should at least see if my mother's account had anything in it before I started pawning what little I owned. The branch was nearly empty, just a few people at the ATMs and a banker sitting at one of the desks, scrolling through his phone with the look of someone bored beyond measure on a Saturday morning. I approached the ATM first, slid in my mother's card, waited for it to be rejected, and to tell me the account was closed, expired, invalid. Instead, it asked for a PIN. I stood there staring at the screen, trying to remember. Had my mother ever told me? I entered her birthday. Invalid. My birthday. Invalid. One more try before the card would be locked. On impulse, I entered the date she'd given me the card. The day before she died. The screen changed. Account accepted. Would you like to check your balance? My hand trembled slightly as I pressed yes. The machine thought for a moment, and then, error. Please see a banker for assistance. Of course, the account probably had $12 in it, and the ATM couldn't even process something that pathetically small. I pulled out the card and walked to the desk, where the bored banker looked up with the expression of someone about to deliver bad news he'd delivered 1,000 times before. Can I help you? Yeah, I have this card from my mother. She passed away 6 years ago, and I'm just trying to see if there's anything in the account. I slid it across the desk, feeling like I was begging. Maybe I was. He picked it up, glanced at it, started to insert it into his computer with that same bored expression. And then his face changed. It was subtle at first, just a slight widening of the eyes, a pause in his movements. But then he looked at the screen, looked at the card, looked at me, and the blood literally drained from his face. Sir, he said, his voice suddenly very different, very careful. Can you wait here for just one moment? Is something wrong? No, not wrong. Just please wait here. He stood up so quickly his chair rolled backward, and then he was walking, almost running to the back offices, the card still in his hand. I watched him go, confused, a sick feeling building in my stomach. Had my mother done something illegal? Was this some kind of fraud? Was I about to be arrested for trying to access a dead woman's account? Minutes passed, long minutes. Other bankers started glancing my way, whispering to each other. A woman in a suit came out of the back office, looked at me, said something sharp to the first banker I couldn't hear. And then they were both walking toward me, and the man's face was still pale, and the woman was carrying a folder, and Mr. Chen, she said, and her voice was gentle in the way people's voices get when they're about to change your life. I'm Rebecca Stein, the branch manager. Could you come with me, please, to somewhere more private? The sick feeling intensified. What's going on? Sir, the first banker said, and his voice was shaking slightly. Please, you need to see this. They led me to a private office in the back, closing the door behind us. The manager sat down across from me, opened the folder, and pulled out a statement. Mr. Chen, I need to verify your identity first. Can I see your driver's license? I handed it over with shaking hands. She studied it, compared it to something on her computer screen, nodded. It's you, she said quietly. You're really you. What are you talking about? She slid the statement across the desk. I looked down at it, at the account number that matched my mother's card, at the name, Margaret Chen, primary account holder, David Chen, beneficiary upon death, and then I saw the balance. I stopped breathing. I had to be reading it wrong, had to be. That many zeros didn't exist in my mother's world. Couldn't exist. It was impossible. I couldn't even finish the sentence. $247 million, the manager said softly. Give or take a few $100,000. The account has been accruing interest for 6 years. Your mother set it up as a trust that would transfer to you automatically upon her death, but only if you used the card she gave you. Until you did, it remained dormant. $247 million. My mother, Margaret Chen, who'd worked double shifts and worried about grocery bills and died in a hospital bed wearing a nightgown I'd bought at Target because it was all I could afford. $247 million. There must be a mistake, I whispered. But Rebecca Stein was shaking her head, pulling out more papers, more documents I couldn't focus on because the number kept swimming in my vision. No mistake, Mr. Chen, though I imagine you have questions about where this came from. Your mother left you something else. She pulled out an envelope, sealed, my name written on it in my mother's careful handwriting. She instructed that this be given to you when you access the account. Along with this, she slid across a business card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. A law firm in London I'd never heard of. They've been managing your mother's estate. Well, your estate now. There are significant holdings beyond this account. Properties, investments, a trust that's been growing for decades. They'll need to speak with you immediately to begin the transfer process. I couldn't speak, couldn't think, could barely breathe. Mr. Chen, the manager said gently, I know this is shocking, but sir, whoever you thought your mother was, whoever you thought you were, everything just changed. I looked down at the envelope in my hands, at my mother's handwriting, at the card with the London law firm's information, and I thought about Elena in her penthouse, celebrating my departure with someone whose name she couldn't even be bothered to mention. Everything just changed. I sat in that office for 20 minutes before I could move. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in my hands. Just paper, just ink, but weighted with 6 years of questions I hadn't known to ask. Around me, the bank hummed with its usual Saturday rhythm, ATMs beeping, people shuffling papers, the soft murmur of transactions that meant everything and nothing to the people conducting them. But in this small room with its generic corporate art and its desk that had probably witnessed 1,000 financial revelations, my entire reality was fragmenting like a mirror-struck dead center. $247 million. I kept trying to make the number feel real, to connect it to the woman who'd raised me in a 3-room apartment where we could hear the neighbors arguing through walls thin as wishes. The woman who'd clipped coupons religiously, who'd made a game out of seeing how cheaply we could eat each week, who'd cried, actually cried, when I got that full scholarship to Columbia because she'd been saving every penny she could spare, and now she could finally stop working herself to death. Except she hadn't stopped, had she? She'd kept working those double shifts right up until the cancer made it impossible, kept living in that same apartment, kept pretending we were barely scraping by while $247 million sat in an account I didn't know existed. Why? My hand shook as I opened the envelope. The letter inside was written on the same cheap notepad paper she'd always used, the kind you buy in bulk from the dollar store. Even now, even revealing whatever she was about to reveal, she'd stayed true to character. My mother, who'd apparently been sitting on a fortune that would make Elena's trust fund wealth look like pocket change, had written this final confession on paper that cost pennies. The handwriting was shaky. She'd been so sick by then, could barely hold a pen, but still recognizable. Still hers. My dearest David, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. It means you've finally used the card I gave you, which means you've hit rock bottom, or close enough that you've remembered your mother's last gift. I'm sorry it had to be this way. I'm sorry for so many things. I lied to you your entire life. Not about loving you, never about that, but about everything else, about who I was, about who your father was, about why we lived the way we lived when we never had to. Your father wasn't Thomas Sullivan, the accountant who abandoned us when you were 2. That man existed, yes, and he did leave, but he wasn't your father. I let you believe it because it was easier than the truth, because the truth would have destroyed the childhood I wanted to give you. A normal childhood, one where you weren't defined by money or legacy or the weight of a name that would have consumed you. I stopped reading, my vision blurring. The walls of the office seemed to be closing in, the air growing thick and hard to breathe. Not my father, Thomas Sullivan, whose name I'd eventually rejected, whose abandonment had shaped so much of who I became, whose absence had taught me what kind of man I didn't want to be. He wasn't even real. not in the way that mattered. I forced myself to keep reading. Your real father was Richard Chen, not Chen by marriage. That was my maiden name, yes, but it was also his family name. We were distantly related, third cousins, which is how we met at a family reunion when I was 23. He was 15 years older than me, already wealthy beyond imagination, already married to a woman his parents had chosen for him, already trapped in a life he never wanted. We fell in love anyway. It was stupid and reckless and wrong, and it was the most real thing I'd ever felt. He couldn't leave his wife, not without destroying his family's business empire, not without losing access to the children he already had, not without causing a scandal that would have ruined dozens of lives. So we existed in the margins, in stolen moments, in a secret that grew heavier with every passing year. And then I got pregnant with you. Richard wanted to leave his wife, then was ready to burn it all down. But I wouldn't let him. I'd seen what that life did to people, David. The money, the power, the way it twisted everything it touched, made people into symbols instead of human beings. I didn't want that for you. I didn't want you raised in that world, suffocated by expectations and duty and the constant weight of wealth you'd never asked for. So I left, took the name Sullivan from a man who'd briefly meant something to me, created a fiction about abandonment, and raised you as if we were poor, as if we were struggling, as if we were normal. But Richard made me promise, made me swear that I would keep the money safe for you, that when you were old enough, strong enough, when you'd become whoever you were going to become without the wealth defining you, you'd have access to everything. Not just his fortune, but the truth. My hands were shaking so badly now I could barely hold the paper. He died when you were 7. Heart attack. I went to his funeral and stood in the back, anonymous, watching his legitimate family grieve. His wife never knew about us. His other children, your half-siblings, never knew about you. His company went to them, his public legacy, all the things he'd built in the world that mattered to people who measure worth in headlines and stock prices. But his personal fortune, the wealth he'd accumulated separately, the investments in properties and accounts he'd kept private, all of that he left to you. Through trusts and holding companies and legal structures so complex it would take a team of lawyers to untangle them. All of it waiting for the day you'd need it. I wanted you to need it, David. I wanted you to live a real life first, to struggle and fail and succeed on your own merit, to know what it feels like to earn something, to build something, to be someone without money making every door fly open before you even knocked. I wanted you to be strong enough to handle what's coming. Because this money, it's not a gift, sweetheart. It's a burden. It will change how people see you. It will make you question every relationship, every friendship, every kindness. It will attract parasites and predators and people who will smile to your face while calculating how to extract value from your existence. But I also know that by the time you're reading this, you've probably learned those lessons anyway. You've probably already experienced betrayal. You've probably already discovered that people can love the idea of you without loving you at all. You've probably already had your heart broken by someone who saw you as a means to an end. I thought of Elena, of 7 years spent being exactly that, a means to an end, though what end I'd never quite figured out. Legitimacy, maybe. The appearance of normalcy, something to parade around while she lived her real life elsewhere. So now you get to choose, my darling boy. You can take this money and build something beautiful with it, or you can let it destroy you the way it destroys so many people. You can use it to become the man I raised you to be, amplified, or you can let it turn you into someone I wouldn't recognize. The lawyers in London have all the details. Property in 8 countries, investment portfolios that span industries I don't even understand, a trust that's been growing since before you were born. You're not just wealthy, David. You're dynasty-level wealthy. You're change-the-world wealthy if you want to be. I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I'm not there to guide you through this. I'm sorry for all the nights we ate pasta and you went to bed thinking we couldn't afford better. When the truth was, I could have bought the entire building we lived in without blinking. But I'm not sorry for giving you a real childhood. I'm not sorry for teaching you the value of a dollar, the dignity of work, the importance of building yourself from the ground up. Those lessons will serve you better than any trust fund ever could. You're going to be angry with me. That's okay. Be angry. Rage at me if you need to. I'm dead. I can take it. But then, when the anger fades, I need you to do something for me. Be good, David. Be careful. Be smart. And be happy. God, please be happy. This money is your inheritance, yes, but it's also your revenge. Revenge against every person who ever underestimated you, who ever treated you as less than, whoever made you feel small. Not revenge through destruction. That's too easy, too crude. Revenge through success, through thriving, through building a life so magnificent that everyone who doubted you has to witness it. You don't owe anyone anything anymore, sweetheart. Not explanations, not apologies, not your presence in their lives. You're free. Use that freedom well. All my love, always and forever, Mom. P.S. There's a safety deposit box at the London office. In it, you'll find photos of your father, of us together, of the life we had in secret. You deserve to know where you came from, even if I spent your whole childhood hiding it. P.P.S. I saw the woman you married. I died before the wedding, but I saw her picture, heard you talk about her. She's beautiful, David. Poised, elegant. Everything the world tells us we should want. But she doesn't love you the way you deserve to be loved. I could tell even then, could hear it in your voice when you talked about her. A note of uncertainty, of trying to convince yourself. I hope I'm wrong. I hope by the time you read this, you've had a wonderful marriage, and I'm just a paranoid, dying woman projecting. But if I'm right, if she's hurt you the way I suspect she will, don't let her take anything from you that matters. Not your dignity, not your kindness, not your belief that real love exists. It does exist, baby. It's just rare, and it never, ever uses money as a weapon. The letter ended there. I sat staring at it, reading and rereading those final lines, until the words blurred together and I couldn't tell if the wetness on my face was tears or sweat or some combination of both. My mother had known, had seen through Elena from hundreds of miles away, from a hospital bed, with nothing but my tone of voice to guide her, had known and had still said nothing, had trusted me to figure it out on my own, had left me this letter like a time bomb set to detonate at exactly the moment I'd need it most. She doesn't love you the way you deserve to be loved. I thought about Elena's face last night, the coldness in it, the calculation, the way she'd smiled when she told me about closing our joint account, about how I'd be leaving with $700 and whatever dignity I could salvage. $700. I almost laughed. Would have laughed, except the sound that came out was closer to a sob. Mr. Chen? Rebecca Stein's voice pulled me back to the present. She was standing in the doorway, holding a bottle of water and wearing the expression of someone who'd witnessed this scene before, in different variations, with different people whose lives had just been detonated by the past. I'm sorry, I managed. I just need a minute. Take all the time you need, but Mr. Chen, the lawyers in London, they'll need to hear from you soon. There are time-sensitive matters related to the estate, properties that need management decisions, investments that require authorization, legal structures that have been in holding patterns waiting for you to claim them. I looked down at the business card she'd given me earlier. Whitmore and Associates, London, the firm that had been managing my inheritance for 6 years, waiting for me to materialize. Whitmore, the same last name as my soon-to-be ex-wife. The universe apparently had a sick sense of humor. What do I need to do? I asked. Call them. Today, if possible. They'll arrange for you to fly to London. First class, all expenses covered from your account. There's a team waiting to brief you on everything. The full extent of your holdings, the legal structures in place, the various entities your father created. She paused, choosing her words carefully. It's complicated, Mr. Chen. Dynasty-level wealth is always complicated. Dynasty-level wealth? The same phrase my mother had used. I thought about the penthouse I'd been evicted from, the one Elena was so proud of, the 23rd floor apartment that had seemed like the pinnacle of success. Thought about her family's wealth, old money from banking and real estate, the kind of fortune that bought influence and memberships and the right to look down on people like me. Dynasty-level wealth made that look like a rounding error. There's one more thing, Rebecca said quietly. She pulled out another folder, this one thicker. Your mother left very specific instructions about privacy. She set up multiple layers of protection to ensure that when you claimed the inheritance, you could do so anonymously. Shell corporations, trusts, legal barriers between your name and the money. If you want, and I strongly recommend you do, you can keep this completely private. No one needs to know who you are or what you have, not until you are ready to reveal it. Why would she do that? Rebecca smiled sadly. Because she was protecting you, Mr. Chen. From exactly the kind of people who'd come out of the woodwork if they knew. The distant relatives suddenly remembering family bonds. The investment opportunities that are too good to pass up. The charitable causes that desperately need your support. The romantic interests who find you fascinating for reasons they can't quite articulate. The romantic interests who'd throw you out with $700 and a smirk if they thought you were poor, but who'd cling like drowning swimmers if they knew the truth. So what do? You go to London, you learn about your inheritance, you make decisions about how you want to move forward, and in the meantime, she glanced toward the door, then back at me. In the meantime, you live your life as if nothing has changed. You don't tell anyone. You don't show any signs of sudden wealth. You let whatever's happening in your personal life play out naturally, without the money influencing anything. You mean my divorce? She didn't answer directly, but her expression said enough. I mean, whatever relationships you're in the middle of resolving. Let them resolve on their own terms, Mr. Chen. Let people show you who they really are without the variable of wealth confusing things. Let Elena show me who she really was. Except she already had, hadn't she? Last night in the penthouse with her casual cruelty and her talk of someone coming for brunch. This morning probably, rolling over in bed and feeling nothing but relief that I was gone. Okay, I said. Okay, I'll call London. I'll figure this out. Good. Rebecca stood, then paused. Mr. Chen, for what it's worth, your mother sounds like she was an extraordinary woman. She was. She'd been a nurse who worked herself to exhaustion while sitting on a fortune. She'd raised me to value things that mattered. Kindness, education, work ethic, integrity, instead of things that impress people. She died in a hospital bed wearing a Target nightgown while holding the keys to a kingdom she never told me existed. She'd lied to me my entire life, and somehow it was the most loving thing she could have done. I left the bank in a daze. The city looked different now, though nothing about it had actually changed. Same streets, same people rushing past with their coffee and their phones and their lives. Same noise encased in beautiful, brutal indifference. But I was different. I walked for blocks without direction, my mother's letter folded carefully in my pocket, the bank card heavy in my wallet, the London law firm's number saved in my phone. The duffel bag over my shoulder felt absurd now. All my worldly possessions, carefully packed, ready to move into Marcus's cramped apartment and figure out how to rebuild from nothing. Except it wasn't nothing. It was $247 million, give or take. Plus properties in 8 countries, plus investment portfolios, plus whatever else was waiting in London to be explained by lawyers who'd been managing my dynasty-level wealth while I'd been living in my wife's shadow. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. You close? Sarah's making lunch. Nothing fancy, but you're welcome to join. I stared at the message. Marcus and Sarah, who were letting me crash on their couch out of friendship and pity. Who had no idea that I could buy their entire building without making a dent in my account. Who were making me lunch. Nothing fancy, while trying to figure out how to gently tell me I couldn't stay long. I should tell them. Should tell someone. This secret felt like it was burning a hole through my chest, too big to contain. But Rebecca's words echoed. Let whatever's happening in your personal life play out naturally. Let people show you who they really are. And my mother's. You don't owe anyone anything anymore. Not explanations, not apologies, not your presence in their lives. I texted back, 30 minutes out. Thanks, man. Then I called the London number. A woman answered on the second ring, British accent, professional but warm. Whitmore and Associates, how may I direct your call? My name is David Chen. I was told to call about an estate matter. A pause, then, Mr. Chen, we've been waiting for you. Please hold for Mr. Whitmore. Another pause, longer this time. I kept walking, letting the city flow around me, thinking about how my life had been split into before and after without my permission. Before the bank, after the bank, before the letter, after the letter, before I knew who my father was, after I knew I'd never actually known him at all. Mr. Chen, the voice was male, older, cultured in that way British lawyers seem to have perfected. Alexander Whitmore, I had the privilege of knowing your father and the honor of serving as executor for your mother's wishes. I cannot tell you how pleased we are that you finally accessed the account. We were beginning to worry. Worried I'd never use it. Worried about what that would mean for you. Yes. Your mother was very specific. You were to receive nothing until you needed it. The fact that you needed it concerns me. I thought about Elena, about the penthouse, about $700 in a smirk. I'm fine, I lied. Forgive me, Mr. Chen, but I've been managing family fortunes for 40 years. No one accesses an emergency inheritance when they're fine. However, that's neither here nor there. What matters now is bringing you up to speed on your holdings and ensuring proper transfer of authority. How soon can you fly to London? I don't know. I need to. To what? I had nowhere to go, no job to request time off from, no obligations tying me anywhere. The divorce papers would come whether I was in New York or London. Elena didn't want me at the penthouse. Marcus's couch was a temporary solution at best. I had nothing keeping me here except momentum, the weight of routine, the illusion that my life still existed in the shape I'd built it. I can come Monday, I heard myself say. Excellent. I'll have my assistant arrange everything. Flights, accommodation, transportation. Everything will be handled. Mr. Chen, I know this is overwhelming, but I promise you by the time you leave London, you'll understand not just your inheritance, but your father's vision for what you might do with it. Mr. Whitmore, yes? My mother, in her letter, she said my father wanted this money kept from me until I was strong enough to handle it. How did he know I'd ever be strong enough? A long pause, then softly, he didn't, Mr. Chen. That was your mother's gamble. Your father wanted you to have everything immediately, full access from birth, your legacy secured regardless of character. It was Margaret who insisted otherwise. She believed that struggle creates strength, that hardship builds wisdom, that a fortune given too early destroys more lives than it saves. And if she was wrong, if I'd never used the card, then the money would have gone to various charities upon your death, with a letter explaining why. Your mother was willing to sacrifice your inheritance and her relationship with you, even posthumously, rather than risk you becoming the kind of person wealth creates too easily. The kind of person Elena was, he meant but didn't say, the kind who measured worth in zeros and treated people like accessories, beautiful and disposable. I'll see you Monday, Mr. Whitmore. Monday, and Mr. Chen, welcome to your new life. Try to enjoy it. He hung up. I stood on the corner of 5th Avenue and 42nd Street, surrounded by thousands of people who had no idea that everything had just changed, watching the city pulse and breathe and continue forward like it always did. Somewhere uptown, Elena was probably still asleep, or maybe already entertaining her someone, celebrating her freedom from the burden of a husband who'd never quite measured up. Somewhere in my pocket, my mother's letter described a fortune that would make Elena's trust fund look like pocket change. And somewhere deep in my chest, something I'd thought was broken started to resemble something else entirely. Not quite hope, not yet, but possibility. The revenge of simply becoming who I'd always been. Only more so. Only amplified. Only free. Marcus's apartment smelled like garlic and burnt toast. I stood in the doorway of the 5th floor walk-up in Hell's Kitchen, my duffel bag still over my shoulder, and tried to reconcile the person I'd been when I left this morning with the person standing here now. Same clothes, same face in the reflection of their hallway mirror. Same David Chen who'd woken up in a penthouse and gone to sleep or tried to, knowing he'd be homeless by Monday. except nothing was the same at all. Dude, you look like hell, Marcus said, pulling me inside. Sarah's making grilled cheese. It's basically her only recipe, so prepare yourself for mediocrity. But it's food. He was trying to be cheerful, trying to make this less awkward than it was. Marcus had always been like that, the friend who showed up, who made room, who asked questions later. We'd met in grad school, bonded over being the scholarship kids in a sea of trust fund economists, stayed friends even after I'd married into the world we'd both resented. He'd never liked Elena, had been too polite to say it directly, but I'd seen it in his face at the wedding, in the way he gradually stopped inviting us to things, in how our friendship had winnowed down to occasional texts and the kind of surface-level catch-ups that mean you are not really friends anymore, just people who used to be. And now I was here, on his couch, pretending to be the person he thought I was. Thanks for this, I said, dropping my bag by the door. I know it's not ideal. It's fine, really. Sarah's a little stressed about the space, but she'll get over it. You're my boy. We take care of each other. He punched my shoulder lightly. That male affection that doesn't know how to express itself properly. So, you want to talk about it? Not really. Elena finally pulled the trigger? Something like that. He nodded, not pushing. Marcus understood the value of silence, of letting things breathe instead of forcing them into the open before they were ready. Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying a plate of sandwiches that were indeed slightly burnt. She was small and fierce, with the kind of energy that made their tiny apartment feel even smaller. I'd met her a handful of times, always at gatherings where Elena had dominated the conversation and Sarah had watched with barely concealed judgment. She'd never liked Elena either. I was starting to realize how many people hadn't. David, she said, not unkindly but not warmly either. Marcus said you needed a place to crash for a few days. Just a few days, I assured her. I'm figuring things out. Uh-huh. She set the plate down on their coffee table, which was also their dining table, which was also their workspace. Look, I'm going to be straight with you because that's who I am. You can stay here through the week. We've got Marcus's cousin coming Friday for a visit, so you'll need to be out by Thursday night. That gives you 5 days to find something more permanent. 5 days. In another timeline, the one from this morning, 5 days would have been a crisis. Nowhere near enough time to find an affordable apartment in New York, even a studio in the outer boroughs. Not with $700 and no job and a divorce in progress. In this timeline, I could buy this building before Thursday. Could buy the whole block. Could solve every one of their problems with a phone call. The thought made me feel sick and powerful in equal measure. 5 days works, I said. Thank you, both of you. We ate the sandwiches, which were exactly as mediocre as advertised. Marcus talked about his something in data analysis for a marketing firm, the kind of work we'd both sworn we'd never do back when we thought we'd change the world through economic policy. Sarah complained about her supervisor, about the tiny kitchen, about the landlord who kept promising to fix the water pressure and never did. Normal problems, small problems. The kind that consumed your entire world when you lived in 600 square feet and split rent 3 ways with your salary and your partner's salary, and the side hustle you pretended was a temporary thing but knew, deep down, was probably permanent. I listened and nodded and contributed nothing about my own situation, and the whole time I felt like a fraud, like I was playing a part in a show where everyone else thought it was real life. My phone buzzed. An email from Whitmore and Associates. Flight confirmation attached. British Airways first class, JFK to Heathrow, Monday 8 o'clock a.m. Car service will collect you at 5:30 a.m. from the address on file. Please confirm receipt. I stared at the screen. The address on file would be the penthouse, the one I'd been evicted from. I typed back quickly. Address has changed. We'll send updates shortly. Another buzz, almost immediate. Understood. Please provide current location at your earliest convenience. Accommodation in London has been arranged at the Connaught. Any preferences or requirements, please advise. The Connaught. I'd walked past it once, years ago, when Elena had dragged me to London for some charity thing her mother was involved in. We'd stayed at Claridge's, which had seemed impossibly luxurious at the time. The Connaught had been the place Elena had pointed to and said, That's where real wealth stays. Not people like us, people who've had it for centuries. People like my father, apparently. I set my phone down before Marcus could see the screen. "You okay?" he asked. "You look weird." "Just tired. Long day." "Yeah, I bet. Divorce shit is exhausting." He leaned back, the couch groaning under his weight. "So what's your plan? You still working at Elena's family firm?" "That's done, obviously." "Right. Fuck. So you need a job too." "Yeah, it wasn't technically a lie. I did need a job, or at least the appearance of one. Needed something to tell people when they asked what I did. Needed a reason to be somewhere during the day. Needed the structure that kept people from asking too many questions. Unless I didn't. Unless I just disappeared into the money. Became one of those people whose occupation was managing their wealth, whose calendar was filled with investment meetings and portfolio reviews, and all the other euphemisms rich people use to avoid saying they didn't actually work. The thought made my skin crawl. I'd spent 7 years watching Elena and her circle do exactly that. Pretend their trust fund management was a career. Pretend their charity board positions were jobs. Pretend they'd earned anything they had. I wouldn't become that. Couldn't. My mother had raised me better, but I also couldn't stay here. Couldn't keep lying to Marcus and Sarah. Couldn't maintain the fiction that I was the person they thought I was. "I'll figure it out," I said finally. "I've got some leads." Another lie. They were stacking up, building a wall between who I was now and who everyone thought I'd always been. That night I lay on Marcus's couch, lumpy, too short, smelling faintly of the takeout they ate too often, and stared at the ceiling. The apartment was quiet except for the sounds of the city filtering through thin walls. Sirens, voices, the constant hum of 8 million people living on top of each other. In the bedroom, I could hear Marcus and Sarah's muffled conversation. Something about bills and whether they could afford to order in tomorrow or if they should finally learn to cook something besides grilled cheese. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, the one I'd used to check my personal account this morning and confirm Elena's claim that I had $700 to my name. Then I added the new account, the one from my mother, the one the banker had helped me link before I'd left in a daze. The balance loaded slowly as if the app itself couldn't believe what it was seeing. $247,384,629.43. I watched the number, waiting for it to change, to reveal itself as a glitch, or a mistake, or a hallucination brought on by stress. But it just sat there, solid and real and impossible. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, even if I tried. I thought about Marcus in the next room, worried about whether they could afford Thai food. I thought about the water pressure that didn't work, the landlord who didn't care, the cousin coming Friday who would displace me because they literally didn't have room for both. I thought about how easy it would be to fix all of this. One phone call, one transfer, problem solved, friendship secured, gratitude eternal. But Rebecca Stein's warning echoed, let people show you who they really are without the variable of wealth confusing things. And my mother's, it will make you question every relationship, every friendship, every kindness. Marcus was my friend, had been my friend through grad school, through the early days with Elena, when I'd still been naive enough to think love conquered all, through the slow dissolution of our regular hangouts as my wife had gradually isolated me from everyone who remembered who I'd been before. He was helping me now because that's what friends did. Not because of what I had, but because of who he thought I was. If I told him, if I fixed his problems with my newfound fortune, I'd never know for sure. Never know if he'd have stayed my friend without it. Never know if the help was genuine or strategic. Never know if our relationship was real or just another transaction in a world that ran on them. I closed the banking app and opened my email instead. The message from Elena's lawyer had arrived while I'd been walking to Marcus's place. I'd seen the notification and ignored it, not ready to face whatever legal dissolution of our marriage looked like in stark black and white. Now lying in the dark, I forced myself to read it. Mr. Chen, please find attached the dissolution of marriage agreement for your review. As discussed with my client, this is intended to be a straightforward separation with minimal conflict. Key terms. All property acquired during the marriage remains with Mrs. Whitmore, including the primary residence, vacation properties, and jointly titled vehicles. All joint financial accounts have been closed, with assets returned to their original sources. Mrs. Whitmore. No alimony or spousal support in either direction. All personal property to be collected by you within 72 hours, or it will be donated to charity. A non-disparagement clause preventing either party from making negative public statements about the other. Mrs. Whitmore is prepared to sign immediately and hopes for your cooperation in expediting this matter. Please confirm receipt and indicate whether you'll be retaining counsel. Regards, Harold Chen, no relation. Senior partner, Morrison and Associates. Harold Chen, the lawyer Elena had mockingly mentioned I couldn't afford, who now revealed himself to share my last name in a coincidence that felt like the universe's idea of a joke. I read through the terms again, slowly this time. She was taking everything, every physical asset from 7 years of marriage. The apartment I'd lived in, the car I'd driven, the furniture I'd helped pick out, all of it legally hers because she'd paid for it, because I'd been too grateful to be loved by someone like her to insist on contributing, to maintain any independence. No alimony. That made sense. She didn't need my money, and I apparently had none to give. A clean break for her, a financial catastrophe for me, bums. Or it would have been, this morning. Now it was just insulting, petty, the kind of power play people made when they thought they held all the cards and you held none. A non-disparagement clause. That was interesting. That meant she was worried about what I might say, what stories I might tell, what truths I might reveal about our marriage. It meant she understood, on some level, that she'd behaved badly enough that she needed legal protection from the consequences. I should sign it, should take the easy way out, let her have her clean break and her clear conscience and her certainty that she'd won. But something in me, something my mother had maybe known would be there when she designed this whole elaborate test, refused, not yet. Not until Elena had shown me fully who she was, until this played out to its natural conclusion, until I understood exactly what 7 years of my life had meant to the woman who'd promised to love me forever. I drafted a response. Mr. Chen, I've received the dissolution agreement and am reviewing the terms. I'll need a few days to consider my options. I'm currently in the process of relocating and securing counsel. Regarding the 72-hour personal property deadline, I'll arrange to collect my belongings this week. Please inform Mrs. Whitmore that I'll be in touch to schedule a time. I'll respond to the broader agreement by end of week. David Chen, professional, calm, giving nothing away. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Sunday morning arrived with rain again, as if the weather had decided to match the general misery of my circumstances. Marcus and Sarah left early for some brunchy thing with friends, inviting me with the kind of forced enthusiasm that made it clear they hoped I'd decline. I did, claiming exhaustion, grateful for a few hours alone in the apartment. The moment the door closed behind them, I called London. Alexander Whitmore answered on the first ring. Mr. Chen, I hope you've had time to process yesterday's revelations. Process is a strong word. I'm still mostly in shock. Understandable. These matters take time. However, I do need to brief you on certain urgent issues before your arrival Monday. Do you have somewhere private to speak? I glanced around the empty apartment. Yes. Excellent. First, regarding your identity protection, your mother established several shell corporations and trusts to act as intermediaries between you and your assets. The primary entity is called Providence Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands. All property, investments, and accounts are technically owned by Providence, which is in turn controlled by a trust of which you are the sole beneficiary. Which means David Chen, the individual, appears to own nothing. David Chen, the trust beneficiary, controls everything. It's a legal distinction that provides enormous privacy protection. No one can trace your wealth back to you unless you explicitly choose to reveal it. My mother really thought this through. Your mother was extraordinarily thorough, Mr. Chen. She spent the last 5 years of her life working with us to ensure every detail was perfect. She anticipated scenarios we thought were paranoid, vengeful spouses, predatory relatives, opportunistic acquaintances. She wanted you protected from all of it. vengeful spouses. Like she'd known. Like she'd seen Elena for what she was and had built a fortress around me just in case. What else do I need to know? Your property portfolio includes residences in London, New York, Paris, Tokyo, Sydney, Cape Town, Sao Paulo, and Dubai. Some are investment properties generating rental income. Others are personal residence, maintained but unoccupied, waiting for you. The New York property is a penthouse in Tribeca, significantly more valuable in private than anything in Midtown or the Upper East Side. A penthouse in Tribeca, probably 2 blocks from where I was sitting on a lumpy couch, pretending to be homeless. You mentioned urgent matters? Yes, several of your properties require immediate decisions about lease renewals or sale opportunities. There are also investment positions that need your authorization to proceed. Your father had started several ventures that were put on hold when he died, waiting for you to take over. And there's the matter of your position on various boards. Boards? Your father held seats on the boards of 6 major corporations. Upon his death, those positions were held in trust to be transferred to you when you claimed your inheritance. You're now legally entitled to those seats and the rather significant stipends that come with them. Several of the companies have been inquiring when you'll assume your responsibilities. Board positions at major corporations. Me, David Chen, who'd been working a mid-level position at his wife's family firm because he'd never quite managed to advance on his own merit. I don't know anything about running a corporation. You don't need to. Board members provide oversight and strategic guidance, not day-to-day management. And you have voting rights on major decisions. It's quite lucrative and requires relatively little time. A few meetings per quarter, some reading of reports. Many board members treat it as semi-retirement. How significant are the stipends? Averaging 2 to 3 million per year per board seat, plus stock options. I did the math, 12 to 18 million per year just for showing up to meetings. That was more than Elena's entire trust fund generated annually. Mr. Chen, are you still there? Yeah, sorry, this is just a lot. It is, which is why Monday's meetings are so critical. We need to walk you through everything systematically, establish your priorities, create a management structure. You'll need a personal attorney, a financial advisor, a tax specialist, possibly a public relations consultant depending on how visible you want to be. I don't want to be visible at all. Understood. However, some visibility is inevitable once you take up your board positions. The business press will take note. Your father was relatively well known in certain circles. Not celebrity level, but respected. They'll be curious about his son finally emerging. His son, David Chen, heir to Richard Chen's fortune and legacy, a person who didn't exist until yesterday, who had no history in that world, no credentials, no network, a person Elena knew nothing about. Can I delay taking the board seats? A pause, You can, though I'd advise against it. The positions generate substantial income and provide legitimacy. They establish you as a serious person in the business world, not just a trust fund recipient. Your mother was quite insistent that you not become the latter. Right, because she'd spent my whole life teaching me that dignity came from work, from contribution, from building something rather than simply consuming. Even now, even from beyond the grave, she was guiding me away from becoming the thing I'd hated in Elena. Okay, I'll take the seats, but I need help. I can't just show up and pretend I know what I'm doing. Of course, we'll provide comprehensive briefing materials on each company, their industries, current challenges, and strategic opportunities. We'll also connect you with advisors who specialize in preparing new board members. You won't be unprepared, Mr. Chen. I promise you that. I heard the apartment door opening, Marcus and Sarah returning earlier than expected. I need to go, I said quickly. I'll see you Monday morning. Monday morning, the car will collect you at 5:30 a.m. Pack for a week, this will take time. He hung up. I shoved my phone in my pocket just as Marcus walked in, looking annoyed. Brunch place had an hour wait, he explained. Sarah's in the bathroom having a meltdown about it. I think she's stressed about you being here, to be honest. Not that it's your fault, just, small space, big feelings. I get it. I'll be out of here soon. You find a place? I'm working on it. Another lie. They were coming easier now, sliding off my tongue like a skill I'd practiced for years. The truth was in my pocket, a penthouse in Tribeca, probably empty, definitely mine, waiting for me to claim it. A life in London for the week, first-class flights and five-star hotels and lawyers who said Mr. Chen like it meant something. A fortune that would solve every problem Marcus and Sarah had, that would make this awkward housing situation disappear, that would prove I was still the friend who showed up, who helped, who cared. But I couldn't tell them. Not yet. Not until this thing with Elena played out. Not until I understood what my life looked like on the other side of this transformation. Not until I knew for certain who I could trust and who was just performing friendship while calculating their angle. So I sat on the lumpy couch and let Marcus complain about brunch wait times and pretended my biggest problem was finding an apartment I could afford with a job I didn't have. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard my mother's voice. This is the burden, David. A dim. Not the money itself, but the secret. The knowing that you could fix everything but choosing not to, because fixing it would ruin the only thing you were trying to save. The truth about who people really are. She'd been right about so much. I was starting to suspect she'd been right about this too. Monday morning came too early and too loud. Marcus's alarm went off at 6:02 a.m., a piercing electronic shriek that penetrated the thin bedroom door and dragged me out of the half-sleep I'd been pretending was rest. I heard him stumble to the bathroom, heard Sarah groan something unintelligible, heard the shower start and the pipes groan in protest, that water pressure problem they'd been complaining about. I lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling, calculating. My flight to London left at 8:00 a.m. The car service would have arrived at 5:30 a.m. to collect me from an address I'd never updated, probably sitting outside the penthouse right now with a driver checking his watch and wondering where I was. I'd need to text them, reroute to Marcus's address, explain the delay. Except I couldn't do that without Marcus asking questions. Couldn't have a black car service pull up to this building. Couldn't disappear for a week to London without explaining where I was going or how I was affording it. Couldn't maintain the fiction that I was a broke, jobless divorcee while simultaneously living like someone who just inherited a fortune. Because that's exactly what I was. I pulled out my phone and typed quickly to the number Whitmore and Associates had given me. Need to reschedule flight. Can we push to Tuesday morning? Same time? Something came up that needs handling today. The response came within seconds. Of course, Mr. Chen. I'll rearrange everything. Car service will collect you tomorrow at 5:30 a.m. Please confirm address. I sent Marcus's address, then added, discreet vehicle please, residential area, understood. Crisis averted, temporarily. But that still left the larger problem. I couldn't just vanish to London without Marcus asking questions, and I couldn't answer those questions without either lying more elaborately or revealing the truth I wasn't ready to reveal. The bathroom door opened, releasing a cloud of steam and Marcus in a towel. You're up early, he observed. Couldn't sleep. Yeah, that couch is brutal. Sorry, man. He disappeared into the bedroom to dress, calling back. You got plans today? Job hunting? Here was my opening. Actually, yeah. Got some leads to follow up on. Might be out most of the day. That's good. That's great. Where at? I hadn't thought that far ahead. A consulting firm, downtown, friend of a friend thing, you know how it goes. Right on. Hope it works out. He emerged dressed for his own job, looking tired in the way people do when they're juggling too much with too little. Listen, Sarah and I were talking last night. We want to help more, but the space thing is real. Her cousin's definitely coming Friday, and after that, I know, I'll be out by Thursday, promise. He looked relieved, then guilty about being relieved. It's not that we don't want to help. Marcus, I get it, really. You've already done more than I had any right to ask. He nodded, grabbed his bag, kissed Sarah goodbye. She was still in bed, pretending to sleep through this awkward conversation, and left. The moment the door closed, I texted the Whitmore and Associates number again. Change of plans. Can someone meet me in New York today instead? Need to access the Tribeca property and handle some personal matters before flying to London. The reply came fast. I'll have someone there by noon. The property manager can meet you at the building. Do you need anything prepared? Furnishings, provisions, etc. I looked around Marcus's apartment, the peeling paint, the cramped space, the couch that had destroyed my back. Yes, make it livable. I may need to stay there this week. Understood. I'll coordinate with the property management team. They'll have everything ready just like that. Money made things happen, made problems dissolve, made the impossible become a simple matter of coordination and cost. I understood suddenly why people got addicted to this. Why Elena moved through the world expecting every inconvenience to evaporate, every desire to be instantly gratified. When you had enough money, reality itself became negotiable. The thought made me uncomfortable in ways I couldn't quite articulate. But first I had to deal with the penthouse. Elena's penthouse. The one where 7 years of my life still sat in a closet, waiting to be collected within the 72-hour deadline her lawyer had imposed. I texted her at 9:00 a.m. Need to collect my things today. Will noon work? No response. I tried again at 9:30. Elena, the lawyer gave me 72 hours. I'm respecting your space, but I need access, please. Still nothing. At 10 a.m., her lawyer responded instead, Mrs. Whitmore will not be present. Building concierge has been notified to provide access. Please complete your collection by 2:00 p.m. Not even the courtesy of a direct response. Just her lawyer maintaining the buffer, keeping everything clinical and distant. Fine. I packed my duffel bag, still mostly empty since I'd barely unpacked at Marcus's, and headed uptown. The subway was crowded with Monday morning energy, people pressed together in that particularly New York way of being physically intimate with strangers while maintaining absolute psychological distance. I used to hate the subway. Elena had insisted we take cars everywhere. Ubers when she was feeling casual. Her driver when she wanted to feel important. She'd made fun of people who took public transportation, called it unnecessarily democratic. Like rubbing shoulders with regular New Yorkers was beneath her. Now, standing in a car packed with delivery workers and students and office drones, I felt more real than I had in years. These were people who worked for what they had, who counted dollars, who understood that time was money because they sold their time in hourly increments. These were people my mother had wanted me to understand, to be in the ways that mattered. The penthouse building looked exactly the same as it had Saturday night, imposing, expensive, dripping with the kind of luxury that whispered rather than shouted. The doorman I'd said good morning to 1,000 times looked through me like I was already a ghost. I'm here to collect some belongings, I told him. From 23B, the lawyer should have, yes, sir. Mrs. Whitmore's attorney called. You have until 2:00 p.m. He handed me a temporary access key. Please return this to the desk when you're finished. Mrs. Whitmore, not Elena, not even your wife. The divorce wasn't final, wouldn't be for weeks, but in the doorman's eyes, I was already erased, already nobody. I took the elevator to the 23rd floor, my hands shaking slightly as the numbers climbed. The hallway was silent. It always was, insulated by money and architecture from the chaos of the city below. The key worked. The door swung open. The apartment had been cleaned. Professionally, thoroughly, like they were erasing evidence of a crime. The surfaces gleamed. The air smelled of expensive lemon polish and something floral. Fresh flowers sat in the vase by the window. White orchids, Elena's favorite. Definitely not there Saturday night. She'd already moved on. Already begun the process of erasing me from this space, from her life, from her story. I walked through rooms I'd lived in for 7 years and felt like a stranger. The furniture was the same, but it looked different somehow, more like a magazine spread than a home. Had it always been like this, or had I just stopped noticing at some point, stopped seeing the carefully curated perfection that left no room for actual living? The bedroom was where it hit me hardest. Our bed, her bed, I had to remind myself, was perfectly made. New sheets, I noticed. White instead of the blue ones we'd had. The photos that had sat on the nightstand were gone. My nightstand was completely empty, cleared of the books and glasses and random accumulated debris of shared sleeping space. On my pillow sat an envelope. I recognized Elena's handwriting on the front. David. My hands shook as I opened it. David, I'm not good at confrontation, so I'm doing this in writing. Cowardly, I know, but honest at least. Our marriage is over, has been over for a long time. If I'm being truthful with myself, we both know it. We've been performing for months, maybe years, going through motions, pretending we're something we're not. I don't hate you. I want you to know that. You're a good person, kind, smart, everything my mother said I should want in a husband. But good isn't enough. Kind isn't enough. I need more than nice dinners and comfortable silences in someone who fits the picture. I need someone who excites me, who challenges me, who makes me feel alive instead of just settled. You deserve that too, even if you don't realize it yet. You deserve someone who loves you for who you are, not who they're trying to make you into. I tried to make you into someone you're not, someone comfortable in my world, someone who could keep up with my friends, someone who wanted the life I wanted. It wasn't fair to either of us. The prenup was always about protecting my family's assets, not about not trusting you. But I'm not going to pretend it doesn't make this easier. You get a clean break. I get a clean break. No alimony, no fights about money, no dragging this out in court while lawyers get rich and we both get bitter. Take your things. Take whatever matters to you. The rest is just stuff, and I have plenty of stuff. I'm sorry it ended this way. I'm sorry I wasted 7 years of your life. I'm sorry I couldn't be who you needed, and that you couldn't be who I needed. But I'm not sorry for the good parts. There were good parts, David. Remember those if you can. Be well. I read it twice, then a third time. It was honest. I had to give her that. Brutally, casually honest in the way people can be when they're already emotionally checked out and just want permission to stop pretending. She didn't hate me. She just didn't love me, didn't want me, didn't find me exciting or challenging or alive enough. I was too kind, too good, too comfortable. And the prenup that had protected her family's assets, the one I'd signed without really reading because I'd been too in love to imagine needing protection from the person I was marrying, made everything easy, made me disposable without complication. Take your things. I looked around the bedroom at the life we'd built, the closet full of clothes she'd bought me, the watch she'd given me, the cufflinks from various anniversaries and birthdays, the leather toiletry bag, the expensive shoes, the suits tailored to fit me perfectly. All of it purchased with her money, all of it chosen by her for her version of who she wanted me to be. None of it mine in any real sense. I pulled my old duffel bag off my shoulder and started packing what actually belonged to me. The Columbia hoodie I'd hidden in the back of the closet, a few t-shirts I'd bought myself, some jeans, my old running shoes worn through at the heels, the photo of my mother I'd kept on my dresser until Elena had suggested it was too depressing for the bedroom and I'd moved it to a drawer. The watch could stay, the suits could stay. All the expensive performance costumes she'd dressed me in could stay. I took my mother's photo, my old books, Piketty and Stiglitz and Sen, the economists who'd shaped my understanding of inequality before I'd married into the 1%. My notebook from grad school, full of ideas I'd once had about policy and change and making the world more fair. When I was done, my duffel was half full. 7 years of marriage fit in half a duffel bag. I walked through the apartment one more time, saying goodbye to nothing in particular. The kitchen where we'd barely cooked. The living room where we'd entertained her friends and I'd felt like a prop in her performance. The study where I'd worked remotely while she'd done whatever she did during the days, which I'd never quite figured out. And then I saw it, on the coffee table, partially hidden under a fashion magazine. Another phone, not Elena's primary phone. She was surgically attached to that one. A second phone, the kind people have when they're conducting business they don't want traced, or conversations they don't want discovered. I picked it up. It was unlocked. She'd either forgotten to secure it or hadn't expected me to find it. The messages loaded, my stomach turned. Marcus, not my Marcus, her Marcus. Saturday, 11:43 p.m. He's gone. Finally, I thought he'd make it more difficult. Elena, Saturday, 11:45 p.m. He was always easy to handle, too grateful to put up a fight. Marcus, Saturday, 11:47 p.m. When can I come over? Elena, Saturday, 11:48 p.m. Now, I sent the staff away. Bring champagne, we're celebrating. I scrolled up. Weeks of messages, months maybe, planning the divorce, strategizing how to minimize what I could take, laughing about how I'd been completely clueless, that she'd been seeing someone else. And then, from 3 months ago, Marcus, are you sure about the joint account thing? Seems harsh. Elena, he never contributed to it anyway. It's my money. He's just been living off me like a leech for 7 years. I'm taking back what's mine. Marcus, I guess. Still feels cold. Elena, that's business, baby. Emotions are for people who can't afford lawyers. I took a photo of the screen, then another, and another. Every message that showed premeditation, showed the affair, showed exactly who Elena Whitmore really was when she thought no one was watching. The non-disparagement clause in the divorce agreement suddenly made a lot more sense. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, returned to the bedroom, grabbed my half-full duffel bag, and walked out. At the door, I paused, looked back at the penthouse one last time, the gleaming surfaces, the perfect furniture, the white orchids that had replaced me so seamlessly. Good riddance, I thought, and I meant it. The Tribeca property was everything the uptown penthouse wasn't. The building was understated, converted factory, red brick, the kind of place that whispered wealth instead of screaming it. The lobby was industrial chic, all exposed beams and polished concrete, with a single desk where a woman in her 40s sat reading a tablet. Mr. Chen, she said, standing as I approached. Not a question. She'd been expecting me. I'm Patricia Walsh, the building manager. Welcome home. Home. The word felt strange. Thank you. Mr. Whitmore's team called this morning. We've had the unit fully prepared, linens, provisions, everything you should need for an extended stay. There's also a welcome packet with building information, local service, and contact numbers for anything you might require. She handed me a key card and what looked like a tablet. The unit is fully smart, climate, lighting, security, everything controlled through the app. I've programmed your preferences based on what the London office provided. What preferences? They don't know. From your mother's notes, Mr. Chen. She was very thorough. Of course she was. Even dead, my mother was taking care of me. We took the elevator to the top floor. The penthouse, naturally, because apparently I was a penthouse person now, whether I liked it or not. The doors opened directly into the apartment. I stepped inside and stopped breathing. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Hudson River. The space was open concept, but warm somehow. Exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, furniture that looked comfortable instead of just expensive. There were bookshelves, actually full of books. Art on the walls that looked like someone had chosen it for beauty rather than investment value. It looked like a home. Your mother designed it, Patricia said softly. Years ago when she bought the property. She said it should feel like you, who you really were, not who you might pretend to be. My throat tightened. She never lived here? No, she visited a few times during construction to oversee the details, but she never stayed. She said it wasn't for her. It was for you, for when you needed it. I walked through the space in a daze. The kitchen had a coffee maker, my preferred brand, the one Elena had made fun of as pedestrian. The bathroom had the same cheap shampoo I'd used in college, the kind I'd stopped buying when Elena had stocked our bathroom with $100 bottles of product I couldn't pronounce. In the bedroom, on the nightstand, sat a framed photo I'd never seen before. My mother and a man I didn't recognize, younger versions of themselves, laughing at something beyond the camera's view. They were standing in front of what looked like a Chinese restaurant, his arm around her shoulders, her hand on his chest. Richard Chen, my father, the man I'd never met, never known existed until 3 days ago. He looked happy. They both did. I picked up the frame, studying their faces. He had my eyes, or I had his, I supposed. My mother's smile was different in this photo than any smile I'd seen in person. Unguarded, genuine, lit from within by something that had nothing to do with putting on a brave face for her son. This was what she'd given up. This happiness, this love, This man who'd made her laugh like that. For me, to give me a normal childhood, to protect me from the burden of wealth, to let me become whoever I was going to become without the weight of dynasty crushing me. I set the photo down gently and walked to the windows. The city spread out below looked different from this angle. Not the tourist view I'd had uptown, all glitter and performance. This was the working city, the piers, the warehouses being converted to luxury spaces, the river that had once meant commerce and now meant views for people who could afford them. My phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. How'd the interview go? When will you hear back? Right, my fictional consulting job interview. Went well, I typed back. They want me to do a trial project this week. Might need to stay elsewhere for a few days. Don't want to disturb you guys with my schedule. Not technically a lie. I did have a project, learning to be David Chen, heir to a fortune, board member, person of consequence. And I would be staying elsewhere. That's great news, man. Where will you crash? Friend's place downtown? Sublet situation. I'll explain later. Another lie. They were piling up, building a wall between my old life and my new one, between who Marcus thought I was and who I was becoming. Patricia appeared with the welcome packet. Is there anything else you need, Mr. Chen? No, this is perfect, thank you. She smiled. Your mother loved you very much. We all knew that, everyone who worked on this project. She talked about you constantly, what you liked, what you needed, what would make you happy. She wanted this space to be a refuge, not just a property. She succeeded. Patricia left me alone in the apartment, my apartment. I had to keep reminding myself. I walked through the rooms again, slower this time, taking in the details. Books on the shelves I'd mentioned, loving and passing conversations with my mother years ago. A coffee table that was the right height for someone my size to work at comfortably. A desk positioned to catch the afternoon light, with a view that inspired rather than distracted. Every detail chosen with care. Every element designed around the person I actually was, not the person someone wanted me to be. Elena's penthouse had been a stage set. This was a home. I sat on the couch, comfortable, perfect, exactly right, and pulled out the photos I'd taken of Elena's secret phone. The affair, the planning, the calculated cruelty of someone who'd decided I was a leech, a burden, a 7-year mistake to be corrected with maximum efficiency and minimum cost. Emotions are for people who can't afford lawyers. I thought about my mother's letter. This money is your inheritance, yes, but it's also your revenge. Not revenge through destruction, that's too easy. Revenge through success, through thriving, through building a life so magnificent that everyone who doubted you has to witness it. Elena had no idea what was coming. Had no idea who I was now, what I had access to, what I was becoming. She thought she'd won, thought she'd cast off the dead weight, upgraded to someone more exciting, freed herself from the burden of a husband who'd never quite been enough. She thought I'd be scrambling for apartments I couldn't afford, jobs I was lucky to get, a life rebuilt from scraps. She had no idea I was sitting in a penthouse worth 10 times what hers was, with access to resources that made her family's wealth look like a rounding error, with lawyers in London waiting to brief me on my dynasty-level fortune. She'd played her hand completely. Now it was my turn to play mine. But not yet. Not until London. Not until I understood the full scope of what I had, what I could do, who I was becoming. Let her celebrate with Marcus. Let her think she'd gotten away clean. Let her sign the divorce papers and move on with her exciting new life. The truth would find her eventually. And when it did, I'd make sure every word of her non-disparagement clause was worth its weight in gold. Because I wouldn't need to say anything at all. The truth would speak for itself. Tuesday morning, 5:15 a.m. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Tribeca penthouse, watching the city wake up in shades of gray and gold. Across the river, the lights of Jersey City flickered like distant stars. Below, early joggers traced paths along the waterfront, their breath visible in the October cold. I'd barely slept, had spent most of the night sitting on the couch my mother had chosen, reading through the documents Whitmore and Associates had sent. Property portfolios, investment summaries, corporate board information, legal structures so complex they required glossaries to understand. My phone showed 5:17 a.m. The car would arrive in 13 minutes. I'd packed differently this time. Not the old duffel bag, that felt wrong somehow, like clinging to a version of myself that no longer existed. Instead, I'd found luggage in the apartment's storage closet, expensive leather pieces monogrammed with my initials in subtle stitching. My mother had thought of everything, including the baggage I'd need when I finally stepped into the life she'd been preparing for me. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Car is downstairs, Mr. Chen. Take your time." I took one last look around the apartment, at the bookshelves and the comfortable furniture, and the photo of my parents laughing in front of a restaurant, at the space that had been waiting for me for 6 years, maintained and prepared and kept ready for the moment I'd need it. "Thank you, Mom," I whispered to the empty room. Then I grabbed my bag and left. The car was exactly what I'd requested. Discreet. A black sedan, unmarked, the kind that could have been an Uber or a private car or anything else. No ostentatious display, no screaming wealth. The driver was a woman in her 50s, professional but not stiff. "Good morning, Mr. Chen. I'm Caroline. I'll be taking you to JFK." "Thank you, Caroline." She took my bag, loaded it efficiently, and within minutes we were moving through the empty streets of pre-dawn Manhattan. The city looked different at this hour. Quieter, more honest, stripped of the performance it wore during daylight hours. "First time flying first class?" Caroline asked after a while. "Is it that obvious?" She smiled in the rearview mirror on. "You keep checking your ticket on your phone. People who fly first regularly don't do that. They know it'll be there." I laughed, embarrassed. "Yeah, first time. It's nice, you'll enjoy it. British Airways does it right. Lie flat seats, actual food, people who leave you alone if you want to be left alone." That last part sounds perfect. We drove in comfortable silence for a while. The sunrise was beginning now, painting the sky in colors that made the city look almost beautiful, almost forgivable. My phone buzzed. Elena's lawyer. "Mrs. Whitmore has signed the divorce papers. Please review and return your signature by end of week to expedite the process." She'd signed, already. We'd been married 7 years and she'd signed away the whole thing in less than 72 hours. I should have felt something, pain, anger, loss. Instead, I just felt tired. Tired of being the person she'd wanted me to be. Tired of performing gratitude for being allowed into her world. Tired of making myself smaller so she could feel bigger. I didn't respond to the message. Let them wait. "Bad news?" Carolyn asked, watching me in the mirror. "Just the end of something that should have ended a long time ago." She nodded, understanding in a way that suggested she'd been there herself. "Those are always the hardest endings. Not because you're losing something good, but because you're mourning all the time you wasted trying to make something work that was broken from the start." "Yeah, exactly that." "Well, wherever you're going, I hope it's better than where you've been." London, a city I'd visited once where I'd felt like a tourist in my wife's world, gawking at buildings and history while she'd glided through it all with the ease of someone who belonged. Now I was going back as someone different, someone with property there, with lawyers waiting, with a father's legacy to claim and a life to figure out. "Me too," I said. JFK at 6:00 a.m. was a study in controlled chaos. Business travelers moving with grim efficiency, families wrangling children and luggage, the eternal hum of announcements and rolling wheels, and people going somewhere, anywhere, away from wherever they'd been. Caroline pulled up to the British Airways terminal. "Have a good flight, Mr. Chen. And whatever you're running from, let it stay behind you. Whatever you're running toward, let it be worth it." "How do you know I'm running?" She smiled. "Everyone who takes a 5:30 a.m. car to catch an international flight is running from something. The question is whether they're running towards something better or just running." I thought about that as I walked through the terminal. Was I running? Or was I finally moving forward after years of standing still? The first-class check-in had no line. The agent took my passport, looked at her screen, and her entire demeanor changed. "Mr. Chen, welcome. You're all set. We've upgraded you to our new first-class suite at no additional charge. You'll board through the expedited security line, and the Concord Lounge is available if you'd like to wait there. The what? The Concord Lounge. For our premium passengers. Complimentary breakfast, showers, quiet workspace, whatever you need. Premium passengers. That's what I was now. Not a guy grateful to be flying at all, but someone airlines upgraded without being asked. Someone lounges were available to. Someone the system recognized as mattering. It felt wrong and right in equal measure. The lounge was exactly what you'd expect. Leather chairs, abundant power outlets, a breakfast spread that could have fed a small village. A few other travelers scattered throughout, all of them carrying themselves with that particular confidence that comes from never having worried about money. I loaded a plate with food I didn't particularly want and found a corner seat away from everyone. Pulled out my phone and started reading through the briefing documents Whitmore and Associates had sent. Chen Family Holdings, overview. Total estimated value, 1.2 billion USD as of current fiscal quarter. Primary components, liquid assets, euros, and securities, 247 mm. Real estate portfolio, 340 mm. Corporate holdings and investments, 520 mm. Art and collectibles, only 93 m. $1 billion. Not 247 million like the banker had said. That was just the liquid cash. The full portfolio was $1 billion. I read the number 3 times trying to make it feel real. Failing, the real estate section was particularly overwhelming. London, 5-bedroom penthouse, Mayfair. So I have value 45 some. New York, Tribeca penthouse, 4-bedroom, and value 38 arms. Paris, historic apartment, 6th arrondissement, value 22 mm. Tokyo, modern residence, Shibuya, value 118. Sydney, waterfront home, Point Piper, value 28 million. Cape Town, Villa Clifton, value 25. São Paulo, penthouse, Jardins, value 8 million. Dubai, apartment, Burj Khalifa, value 15 million. Additional investment properties generating rental income, 23 units across various markets. Total loss, value 154 million. I owned property on 4 continents. Had homes in cities I'd barely heard of, let alone visited. The apartment in Paris alone was worth more than most people would earn in multiple lifetimes. And I'd been living in Elena's penthouse, grateful for the privilege, never knowing I had my own property sitting empty, waiting for me. The corporate holdings were even more staggering. Board positions with voting rights and stipends. Tech Venture Capital Partners, annual stipend, 2.8. Global Logistics International, annual stipend, 3.2. Chen Pacific Investment Group, annual stipend, 2.1 million. Renewable Energy Holdings Limited, annual stipend, 1.9 m. Healthcare Innovation Fund, annual stipend, 2.4 m. Asian Markets Development Corp, annual stipend, 3.1 m. $15 million per year just for attending board meetings. That was more than Elena's entire family generated from their supposedly impressive trust fund. I was richer than the woman who'd thrown me out for being poor. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. First time seeing the big picture? I looked up. A man in his 60s had taken the seat across from me. Silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of face that had spent decades in boardrooms making decisions that affected thousands of lives. I'm sorry, he gestured at my tablet. The way you're staring at those documents, the particular expression of someone seeing their net worth laid out for the first time and trying to process what it means. I've seen that look before, usually on the faces of lottery winners or people who've just inherited something significant. I should have been annoyed at the intrusion. Instead, I was curious. Which were you? Neither. I built mine the old-fashioned way. 60-hour weeks for 40 years, 3 failed marriages, and more stress ulcers than any human should survive. He extended a hand. Jonathan Chen. No relation, I assume, though the name made me notice your documents. I shook his hand. David Chen. And no, probably not related, though I'm learning my family history is more complicated than I thought. Isn't everyone's? He settled back in his chair. Word of advice, if you want it, don't let the numbers define you. I see a lot of people, young people usually, who inherit or suddenly acquire significant wealth, and it destroys them. They stop being people and become portfolios. Stop having goals and start having acquisition strategies. You think that's what happens? I think money is a tool or a trap depending on how you approach it. Used right, it gives you freedom. Freedom to pursue what matters, to help who you want to help, to build something meaningful. Used wrong, it becomes your identity, your only identity. I thought about Elena, about her friends, the ones who'd never worked a day in their lives but talked constantly about being busy with their foundation boards and charity galas. People who'd let their money become their entire personality. How do you know the difference? I asked. Ask yourself what you'd do if you lost it all tomorrow. If the answer is panic or not know who I am anymore, you've let it become a trap. If the answer is figure it out and rebuild, you're using it as a tool. And which are you? He smiled. I'd be fine. Annoyed, definitely, but fine. Because I know who I am independent of the bank balance. Took me 3 divorces and a heart attack to figure that out, but I got there eventually. 3 divorces sounds expensive. 3 divorces to women who loved my money more than they loved me was the expensive part. The divorces themselves were just a correction. He stood, grabbed his bag. They're calling my flight, but David Chen, not related, remember. Wealth is an amplifier. It makes you more of what you already are. If you're generous, it lets you be more generous. If you're cruel, it lets you be more cruel. If you're lost, it makes you more lost. And if you're angry, he paused, studying me, then it lets you be more angry, which can be useful if the anger is directed at the right targets and channeled into the right actions. But anger that just burns without purpose, that'll consume you faster than any amount of money can sustain. He left. I sat there with my tablet, my billion-dollar portfolio, my board positions and properties and liquid assets, and thought about anger. I was angry. At Elena for 7 years of making me feel small. At myself for letting her, at the system that let people like her glide through life on inherited wealth, while people like my mother worked themselves to death. But Jonathan Chen, not related, was right. Anger without purpose was just corrosive. Anger channeled into something constructive, something meaningful, something that made the world better rather than just making you feel better. That was different. My mother had given me a fortune. What I did with it, whether I used it as a tool or let it become a trap, was up to me. The flight was called. I boarded through a separate entrance, away from the crowds, into a cabin that bore no resemblance to any airplane I'd ever been on. The first-class suites were private pods with doors that closed, seats that transformed into fully flat beds, personal wardrobes for hanging clothes. The flight attendant, Emma, her name tag read, greeted me with a warmth that seemed genuine rather than performed. Mr. Chen, welcome aboard. Can I get you started with a drink, champagne, perhaps? Or we have an excellent selection of wines. Just water, thank you. Of course. And for breakfast, we'll be serving shortly after takeoff. The menu is in your suite, but I'm happy to walk you through the options. She left me alone to settle in. The suite had more space than some New York studio apartments. A TV screen, a tablet loaded with entertainment, an amenity kit from some designer brand I didn't recognize, pajamas and slippers in case I wanted to change. This was how the other half lived. The half Elena had always belonged to and I'd been granted temporary access to through marriage. Except now I didn't need her permission, didn't need her family's acceptance, didn't need to perform gratitude for being allowed into spaces I could now access on my own merit, or at least on my own money, which apparently was the only merit that mattered at this altitude. The plane filled slowly. Through the gap in my suite door, I could see other first-class passengers boarding, businessmen in suits, a couple who looked like they'd never flown any other way, a woman with the kind of jewelry that suggested her net worth had its own zip code. And then, impossibly, I heard a voice I recognized. Yes, the suite is fine. No, I don't need champagne. I need the Wi-Fi password. I have emails to send. Elena, my blood went cold. I closed my suite door completely, peered through the small gap. 3 rows ahead, being shown to her own suite. Elena, dressed in travel casual that probably cost more than most people's wardrobes, her hair perfect, her manner imperious. She was on my flight to London. Of course she was, because the universe apparently had a very specific sense of humor about these things. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and texted Whitmore and Associates. Is there any way to change seats without changing flights? Situation has developed. The response came quickly. I can inquire with the airline. Is there a problem, Mr. Chen? My soon-to-be ex-wife is on this flight. 3 rows ahead. She can't see me. A longer pause this time, then, understood, let me see what can be done. In the meantime, keep your suite door closed. First class is designed for privacy. She won't see you unless you make yourself visible. The plane began to taxi. Too late to switch seats now. I was trapped in a metal tube at 35,000 feet with the woman who'd thrown me out 72 hours ago, who had no idea that the broke husband she'd discarded was sitting in a suite that cost more than the monthly rent on Marcus's apartment. Emma appeared at my door. Mr. Chen, is everything all right? You look pale. I'm fine, just not a great flyer. Well, you're in the best place for it. Once we're airborne, I can bring you something to help you relax. And the suites are very quiet. You'll barely feel the flight. Thank you, she left. The plane accelerated, lifted, climbed. Through my window, New York fell away. The city where I'd lost everything and discovered I'd never had anything to lose in the first place. 7.5 hours to London. 7.5 hours of hiding from the woman who thought she'd seen the last of me. 7.5 hours to figure out what I was going to do, with the truth burning a hole through my chest. I pulled out my tablet and opened the divorce papers Elena's lawyer had sent, read through them again, carefully this time, paying attention to the details I'd glossed over before. The prenup protected her family's assets. Fine. But the dissolution agreement went further. It explicitly stated that both parties entered the marriage with minimal personal assets and accumulated nothing of joint value during the union. That was her narrative. We'd both been essentially broke when we married, and she'd supported me throughout. Therefore, no alimony, no asset division, no complications. It was a lie, but a convenient one. A lie I'd been prepared to accept this morning, when I'd thought I had nothing to fight her with. But now I had documentation proving that wasn't true. Had proof that I'd entered the marriage with assets, held in trust, yes, but mine nonetheless. Had evidence that the narrative she was constructing was fundamentally false. I could fight this, could drag it out, could make her divorce expensive and complicated and very, very public. But my mother's words echoed, not revenge through destruction. That's too easy. Your revenge through success, fighting Elena in court would be destruction, would be satisfying in the short term and hollow in the long term, would make me look petty and vengeful and small. Letting her win, letting her think she'd gotten away with it, and then building a life so magnificent she'd have to witness it from the outside, that was success. That was revenge worth having. I pulled out my phone and opened a new email to her lawyer. Mr. Chen, I've reviewed the dissolution agreement. I'm prepared to sign as written, with one modification. The 72-hour deadline for property collection is extended to 30 days, as I'm currently traveling and cannot complete collection in the original time frame. All other terms are acceptable. I'll return signed documents upon my return to New York. Regards, David Chen, professional, calm, giving nothing away. I hit send. Then I opened the folder Whitmore and Associates had sent labeled Board Meeting Calendar and started reading. 6 board positions, 18 meetings per quarter. Each one an opportunity to learn, to contribute, to prove I was more than just an inheritance recipient. To become someone who deserved the fortune my father had left and my mother had protected. To become someone who didn't need Elena's validation or approval or presence in my life. Someone who could look back at 7 years of marriage and see it as a chapter that ended badly but taught necessary lessons. Someone who could sit 3 rows behind his soon-to-be ex-wife at 35,000 feet and feel nothing but pity for how small her world was about to become. The suite door opened slightly. Emma, Ubayan and Emma with a tray. I brought you the breakfast service. I noticed you seemed stressed earlier, so I included the smoked salmon. Comfort food, at least for me. I smiled despite everything. Thank you, Emma. And Mr. Chen? Whoever she is, whatever happened, you're going somewhere better. I can always tell. How? Body language. People flying towards something good sit differently than people flying away from something bad. You're doing both, which means you're in transition. And transitions are hard, but they're also where life gets interesting. She left me with breakfast and wisdom and the gentle hum of engines carrying me toward a life I hadn't known existed 72 hours ago. Somewhere ahead, Elena was probably checking email, planning her exciting new life with her exciting new man, celebrating her clean break from the burden of a husband who'd never been quite enough. She had no idea I was 3 rows behind her. She had no idea what was waiting for me in London. She had no idea that by the time this flight landed, I'd be a different person than the one she'd thrown away. I ate my breakfast, the smoked salmon really was comfort food, and watched the Atlantic scroll by below, dark and endless and full of possibility. Behind me, 7 years of being small. Ahead, whatever I chose to build with the tools my mother had left me. The choice finally was mine. Heathrow at 9 p.m. local time was a blur of fluorescent lights and crowds moving with the exhausted determination of people who'd been compressed into metal tubes for hours and just wanted to be anywhere else. I'd spent the entire flight in my suite with the door closed, pretending to sleep, actually reading through board meeting minutes and financial reports until my eyes burned. Emma had checked on me periodically, bringing meals I barely touched, asking if I needed anything with the kind of attentiveness that made me wonder if the airline had been told I was someone important, which apparently I was. 3 rows ahead, Elena had disembarked first. First-class passengers got priority everything. A fact I was learning in real time. I'd watched through the gap in my door as she'd swept past. Phone pressed to her ear, laughing at something someone said. Probably Marcus. Probably planning where they'd meet in London, what exciting things they'd do together now that she was free. I waited until she was completely gone before leaving my suite. Immigration was surprisingly quick. The officer glanced at my passport, asked the purpose of my visit. Business, I'd said, which was technically true, and waved me through without the usual interrogation about return flights and accommodation. Money, I was learning, made borders more permeable. Baggage claim was where it got interesting. I was standing at the carousel watching luggage circle like some kind of existential meditation on travel when I heard my name. Mr. Chen? I turned, a man in his 30s, impeccably dressed in a dark suit holding a tablet with my name on it. Behind him, a woman about the same age with sharp eyes and a leather portfolio. Yes? James Crawford, the man said, extending his hand. From Whitmore and Associates. This is my colleague, Rachel Okonkwo. Mr. Whitmore sent us to collect you and provide initial briefing during the drive into the city. Oh, I thought I'd just take a cab. Please, Rachel said, her accent British with Nigerian undertones. We have a car waiting, and there's quite a bit to cover before your meetings tomorrow. It's easier to start now, if you don't mind. Mind? I was still trying to process that they'd sent 2 lawyers to the airport to collect me like I was someone whose time was too valuable to waste on ground transportation logistics. Sure, okay. My bag appeared on the carousel, easy to spot among the standard black luggage, the monogrammed leather standing out like a beacon. James grabbed it before I could move. This way, please. They led me through the terminal, past the taxi queues and shuttle bus stops, to a private car park where a Mercedes waited, engine running, driver ready. This was how the other half traveled. Not waiting in lines, not figuring out ground transportation, not worrying about anything except showing up and being driven to wherever they needed to be. The car was warm, comfortable, equipped with bottled water and a small selection of snacks. James and Rachel sat across from me, tablets out, looking like they were about to conduct a mobile board meeting, which I suppose they were. So, Rachel began as the car pulled into London traffic. How much do you know about your father's business empire? Almost nothing. Until Saturday, I didn't know he existed. They exchanged a glance that suggested they'd expected this answer. Right, James said. Well, the short version is that Richard Chen was a financial genius who made his first fortune in technology investments in the late 1980s, then diversified into real estate, venture capital, and strategic acquisitions. He was particularly skilled at identifying emerging markets before they emerged, invested heavily in Asian tech companies before the boom, renewable energy before it was fashionable, logistics infrastructure before e-commerce made it essential. He was also intensely private, Rachel added. Most of his wealth was held through shell companies and trusts. His name didn't appear on rich lists or in business magazines. People in certain circles knew of him, respected him, but the general public had no idea he existed, like my mother had wanted for me. Your mother's instructions were very specific, James continued. You were to inherit everything, but only when you accessed the account she'd given you. Until then, the assets were to be managed conservatively, grown steadily, and kept completely separate from your life. Why? I mean, I understand she wanted me to have a normal childhood, but why keep it secret even after I was an adult? Rachel leaned forward. Because she wanted to make sure you developed your own identity first. Wanted you to build relationships based on who you are, not what you have. Wanted you to understand the value of work, of struggle, of building something from nothing. She wanted you to be strong enough to handle wealth without letting it define you, James said, and she was willing to gamble your entire inheritance on that belief. If you'd never used the card, never needed the money, it would have gone to charity. She was that committed to the idea that you shouldn't have access to wealth until you were ready for it. The car moved through London streets that looked vaguely familiar from my one previous visit. Except then, I'd been seeing the city through Elena's filter. The tourist spots she deemed worthy, the restaurants her mother recommended, the shopping districts where she could find things you can't get in New York. Now I was seeing it as someone who apparently owned property here, who had business here, who belonged in whatever complicated way inherited wealth conferred belonging. So what happens now? I asked. Rachel opened her portfolio. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., you'll meet with Mr. Whitmore and the senior partners. They'll walk you through the complete portfolio, every asset, every investment, every property. You'll sign documents transferring legal authority from the trust to you personally. You'll be briefed on your board positions and what they entail. And then you decide what kind of heir you want to be, James said. Some people who inherit wealth become caretakers. They maintain what they've been given but don't really engage with it. Others become stewards. They actively manage, grow, shape the portfolio. And some become visionaries. They take the foundation they have inherited and build something entirely new. Which was my father? Visionary, but tomorrow, Rachel said without hesitation. He didn't just maintain wealth, he created it, saw opportunities others missed, took calculated risks that paid off spectacularly. And my mother? They both smiled. Your mother was the moral compass, James said. Richard would come up with brilliant financial strategies, and Margaret would ask if they were ethical, if they helped people or just extracted value, if they built something meaningful or just accumulated more zeros. She kept him honest, Rachel added, made him think about legacy beyond just money. Several of his most successful ventures, the renewable energy investments, the healthcare innovation fund, the educational infrastructure projects in developing countries, those were all her influence. I thought about my mother in her nurse's scrubs, working double shifts, clipping coupons, pretending we were poor while quietly ensuring her secret partner's billions were being deployed for good. She sounds exhausting, what I said. Rachel laughed. Oh, she was. We have meeting notes. She'd call Mr. Whitmore monthly to check on the portfolio, question investment decisions, demand detailed explanations of the social impact of every major position. She drove him crazy. He absolutely adored her. The car pulled up to a hotel I recognized from Elena's pointed comment years ago. The Connaught. All understated elegance and old money confidence. The kind of place that didn't need to advertise because the people who belonged there already knew about it. We've arranged a suite for you, James said as the driver opened my door. Mr. Whitmore thought you might need a few days to adjust, so there's no specific departure date. Stay as long as you need. A doorman materialized to take my bag. Another staff member appeared with a welcome drink on a silver tray. The lobby glowed with soft lighting and expensive surfaces, and the quiet hum of wealth so secure it didn't need to prove anything. "One more thing," Rachel said before I could escape into the hotel. "Your mother left you a letter, a second letter. Mr. Whitmore has it. He'll give it to you tomorrow after the portfolio briefing. She wanted you to have the full picture first, before reading her final thoughts." "What does it say?" "We don't know. The envelope is sealed, but Mr. Whitmore says it's important, that it will help you understand not just what you have, but what you're supposed to do with it." They left me there with my luggage and my confusion and the growing sense that my mother had orchestrated every detail of this revelation with the precision of someone who had spent years planning for a single moment. The suite was absurd. Not just a room, a full apartment, living area, bedroom, bathroom with a tub the size of a small pool, a second bedroom I had no use for, a dining table that could seat 8. The decor was tasteful without being stuffy, comfortable without being casual, expensive in ways that whispered rather than shouted. I stood at the window looking out at London. Mayfair, Rachel had said, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in one of the most expensive cities in the world, and tried to reconcile this with the version of myself that had woken up Saturday morning in Elena's penthouse, thinking $700 was all I had. 4 days ago, that's all it had been. 4 days since my marriage ended. 4 days since I'd discovered my mother's secret. 4 days since David Chen, poor scholarship kid made good through marriage, had died and someone else had taken his place. Except I didn't feel like someone else. Didn't feel transformed or elevated or whatever was supposed to happen when you discovered you were secretly rich. I just felt tired and angry and confused about what any of this meant. My phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. "Hey man, how's the consulting gig going? You settling in okay?" Right. My fictional job interview, my fictional trial project, my fictional life that was easier to maintain than explaining the truth. "It's good," I typed back. "Lot to learn. Might be here longer than I thought." "That's great. They must really like you. Where are you staying?" I looked around the suite, at the fresh flowers in crystal vases, at the minibar stocked with top-shelf everything, at the toiletries that probably cost more than Marcus spent on groceries in a week. "Corporate housing," I lied. "Nothing fancy, but it works." Another buzz, different number. "Elena's lawyer, Mrs. Whitmore, has agreed to the 30-day extension for property collection. Please note that uncollected items after that deadline will be donated as specified in the original agreement." So Elena had signed off on giving me more time. Probably relieved. Actually, 30 more days before she had to think about me again. Before my existence intruded on her exciting new life with her exciting new man. 30 days seemed like both forever and not enough time at all. I ordered room service, not because I was hungry, but because I wanted to see what 85 club sandwich tasted like. Turned out it tasted like regular club sandwich, but with more guilt and garnish. Then I tried to sleep. Couldn't. Instead, I lay in a bed that cost more per night than I used to make in a week, staring at the ceiling, thinking about my mother working double shifts while managing a billion-dollar portfolio. About my father, the man I'd never meet, who'd built an empire and given it all to a son he'd never know. About Elena, probably in London somewhere too, celebrating her freedom with Marcus while wearing jewelry that represented a rounding error compared to what I now owned. About revenge that looked like success, and success that felt like loneliness, and loneliness that money couldn't solve no matter how many zeros you added to the account. Morning came with rain. Of course it did, because London apparently had the same weather philosophy as my life, perpetually gray and vaguely depressing. I dressed carefully. Not in the suits Elena had bought me. Those were still in her penthouse, waiting to be collected or donated. Instead, I wore what I'd brought from the Tribeca apartment. Simple, well-made, the kind of clothes that didn't scream wealth but didn't apologize for existing either. The car arrived at 8:30 a.m. Same driver, different lawyers. These ones older, more senior, carrying themselves with the weight of people who'd spent decades managing other people's money. "Mr. Chen," the woman said as I slid into the car. "I'm Catherine Mills, senior partner. This is Robert Tang. will be accompanying you to this morning's meeting. Is all this really necessary? The car, the escorts, the performance? Robert finished, smiling slightly. Yes, actually, you're about to take control of $1 billion portfolio, Mr. Chen. There are protocols, procedures, ways things are done. Part of our job is making sure you understand the world you're entering. And part of it is making sure that world takes you seriously, Catherine added. You're young, unknown, coming out of nowhere to claim a fortune most people don't know existed. There will be skepticism, questions about your legitimacy, your competence, your right to control what your father built. The performative aspects, the cars, the lawyers, the careful orchestration, all of that sends a message that you're not to be taken lightly. But I don't know what I'm doing, I said. Neither did your father when he started, Robert said. Neither does anyone, really. The difference between people who succeed with inherited wealth and people who squander it isn't knowledge. It's willingness to learn, to ask questions, to surround yourself with people who know more than you do and actually listen to them. The car pulled up to a building in the financial district. Old stone facade, brass plaques, the kind of place that had been managing wealth since before wealth management had a name. Whitmore and Associates occupied the top 3 floors. We rode the elevator in silence. The doors opened to a reception area that looked like a museum, antique furniture, oil paintings and gilt frames, a Persian rug that probably cost more than most cars. And standing in the center of it all, a man in his late 70s with white hair and piercing blue eyes. Alexander Whitmore. Mr. Chen, he said, walking forward with his hand extended. Finally, I've been waiting 6 years to meet you. His grip was firm, his gaze assessing. Up close, I could see the decades in his face, the lines earned through complicated negotiations and difficult choices, the weariness of someone who'd seen too much of how money warped people. Mr. Whitmore? Please, Alexander, your father was Richard to me, not Mr. Chen, and your mother was Margaret, who terrified me on a regular basis with her ethical interrogations. I'm not going to stand on formality with their son. He led me through the offices, people working quietly at desks, conference rooms where serious conversations happened behind frosted glass, walls lined with law books and financial texts. Finally, a corner office with windows overlooking the city, a conference table already set up with documents, binders, pallets, everything organized with military precision. Sit, Alexander said, gesturing to the head of the table. This is going to take hours, so get comfortable. Catherine, Robert, you know what to do. They began pulling out documents, explaining structures, walking me through the labyrinth of my inheritance. And for the next 4 hours, I learned exactly what my mother had been hiding. The full portfolio was overwhelming in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the properties or the investments or the board positions. It was the complexity, the layers of trusts and holding companies, the international tax structures, the investment vehicles I'd never heard of, the passive income streams from businesses I didn't know I owned parts of. Your father was playing 3-dimensional chess, Catherine explained, showing me flowcharts that looked like conspiracy theory mind maps. Every decision created options for future decisions. Every investment opened doors to other investments. He thought in decades, not quarters. And your mother made sure none of it was evil, Robert added with a slight smile. Every position was vetted for social impact. Every company had to meet ethical standards. She rejected several extremely profitable opportunities because they failed her moral calculus. Like what? I asked. Private prisons, Alexander said. Predatory lending, fossil fuel extraction in protected areas. Tobacco, obviously. Weapons manufacturing for authoritarian regimes. Your father wanted to invest in all of them. Purely from a returns perspective, they were excellent opportunities. Your mother said absolutely not, and she won every argument. I thought about that, about my mother, nurse and moral compass, vetoing billion-dollar opportunities because they made money the wrong way. So what do I own? I asked. Catherine flipped to a summary document. Clean energy companies, healthcare innovation firms, educational technology, affordable housing development. logistics and infrastructure that enables commerce but doesn't exploit labor, technology companies with ethical data practices, agricultural investments focused on sustainable practices. She essentially forced your father to become an impact investor before impact investing had a name, Robert said. And here's the beautiful part. It worked. The portfolio performs exceptionally well precisely because it invests in things that solve problems rather than exploit them. Turns out ethical business is good business. So what's the catch? I asked. Alexander laughed. Smart. Yes, there's a catch. Several, actually. He pulled out another document, this one labeled Obligations and Expectations. First, the board positions. You can't just collect the stipends and ignore the responsibilities. These companies need actual oversight, actual governance. You'll need to attend meetings, read briefings, understand the industries, vote on major decisions. It's work, not free money. Okay. Second, the properties. Several are generating rental income, but they require active management, maintenance decisions, tenant relations, strategic choices about when to hold versus when to sell. You'll need property managers, but you're ultimately responsible. Okay. Third, and most importantly, the legacy. Your father built this empire with your mother's ethical guidance. That guidance is now your responsibility. Every investment decision, every board vote, every strategic choice, you're the moral compass now. And people will be watching to see if you maintain the standards she set. He paused, studying me. No pressure, obviously. I laughed, slightly hysterical. Right. No pressure, just become the person my mother spent my entire childhood preparing me to be, while also learning how to manage $1 billion and sit on corporate boards and maintain properties on 4 continents and somehow not become the kind of person who lets money define them. Easy. Actually, Alexander said quietly, I think you'll be fine. Why? Because you're terrified. People who inherit wealth and immediately think they know what they're doing, those are the ones who crash and burn. People who inherit wealth and are appropriately terrified, those are the ones who ask questions, listen to advisors, make careful decisions. Fear is healthy. It keeps you humble. Catherine slid one more document across the table. There's also this. I looked down. It was a sealed envelope. My name written on the front in my mother's handwriting. Alexander stood. We'll give you some privacy. Take your time. When you're ready, we'll be outside. They filed out, closing the door behind them. I sat alone in that conference room, surrounded by documents explaining my $1 billion inheritance, holding the last letter my mother would ever write me. Outside the windows, London continued its daily business, people rushing to meetings, making deals, building careers, living lives that intersected with money but weren't defined by it. I took a breath and opened my mother's final message. My darling David, if you're reading this, you've made it to London. You've seen the portfolio. You've met Alexander and his team. You've started to understand what your father built and what I protected. And you're probably terrified. Good. The handwriting was shakier than in the first letter. She must have written this even closer to the end, when the cancer had stolen more of her strength. I had to squint to read some words, had to guess at others where her hand had trembled too much to form letters properly. I need to tell you something I couldn't say in the first letter, something about your father that changes everything. Richard didn't just give you money, David. He gave you a choice. When he knew he was dying, heart disease, same thing that killed his father, he rewrote his entire estate plan. His legitimate children, the ones from his marriage, they got the company, the public legacy, the Chen name in the business world, everything their mother expected them to inherit. But you got something different. You got freedom. His public fortune was tied to obligations, board seats he'd held for decades, family expectations, social responsibilities, the weight of being a Chen in the circles where that name mattered. His children inherited all of that. The privilege, yes, but also the prison. You inherited the private fortune, the one he built separately, carefully, with no strings attached. No family obligations, No expectations from ancestors or society or anyone except yourself. My hands were shaking now. Do you understand what that means? You don't have to be anyone. You don't have to maintain a dynasty or live up to a name or perform for people who knew your father. You get to decide completely, totally who you want to be. You can take the board seats or decline them, keep the properties or sell them. Stay in New York or move to Tokyo or disappear to a beach somewhere and never think about money again. You can be a philanthropist or an investor or a teacher or absolutely nothing at all. That's the gift, baby. Not the money, the choice. Your half-siblings will never have that. They'll spend their lives being Richard Chen's children, living up to his legacy, trapped by expectations and obligations in the weight of a name they didn't choose. You get to be David Chen, whoever that turns out to be. But here's what I need you to understand. With that freedom comes responsibility, not to your father's memory, or to his business empire, or to anyone else's expectations. Responsibility to yourself. You have resources now that most people can't imagine. Resources that can change lives, solve problems, build things that matter. What you do with them, how you use this freedom, that's the real inheritance. Will you use it to become someone I'd be proud of? Someone you'd be proud of? Or will you let it make you lazy, entitled, disconnected from the people and struggles that shaped you? I can't control that. Your father couldn't control it. That's why we built all these structures, all these delays, all these tests, not to control you, but to give you the best chance of controlling yourself. The money isn't a reward, David. It's a tool. What you build with it is up to you. But if you're reading this in Alexander's office, overwhelmed and scared and wondering how the hell you're supposed to do any of this, then I'll tell you what I would have told you if I were still there. Start small. Start with one thing that matters to you, one problem you want to solve, one person you want to help, one corner of the world you want to make slightly less terrible. And then do that, just that. Let everything else wait. You don't have to change the world tomorrow, baby. You just have to show up today and try to be decent with the resources you've been given. The rest will figure itself out. The letter continued, but my vision was blurring too much to read clearly. I blinked hard, trying to clear my eyes, trying to hold it together in this conference room where lawyers who'd known my mother were probably listening outside the door. I'm sorry I won't be there to see who you become. I'm sorry I had to lie to you for so long. I'm sorry for every hard moment, every struggle, every time you went without something because I was pretending we couldn't afford it when we absolutely could. But I'm not sorry for raising you the way I did. I'm not sorry for making you work for things, fight for things, understand that nothing worth having comes easy. Because now when you have everything, you'll know what nothing feels like. And that knowledge, that memory of struggle, that's worth more than any amount of money I could have given you. You're going to be fine, David, better than fine. You're going to be exactly who you're supposed to be. I love you. I've always loved you. I'll love you forever. Now go build something beautiful with the mess I've left you, Mom. P.S. Alexander has something else for you, a key. Ask him about the safety deposit box in the vault downstairs. Your father wanted you to have what's inside, but he wanted you to decide when you were ready to see it. Don't rush. Some truths can wait until you're strong enough to carry them. I set the letter down carefully, like it might disintegrate if I handled it too roughly. Outside the windows, London continued. Rain had started again, painting the glass in rivulets that distorted the city into something abstract and unreal. I thought about my half-siblings, somewhere in the world carrying the burden of being Richard Chen's legitimate children, managing his company, living up to his public legacy, trapped by the weight of expectations I'd never have to bear. I thought about Elena, who'd thrown me out because I wasn't enough, wasn't exciting enough, wasn't wealthy enough, wasn't whatever enough, never knowing that I was inheriting freedom itself. And I thought about my mother working herself to death to give me the gift of choice. The door opened quietly. Alexander stepped in, saw my face, and stopped. She had that effect on people, he said gently. Even from beyond the grave, Margaret Chen could make you feel simultaneously loved and terrified. She mentioned a safety deposit box. He nodded. I have the key. When you're ready, we'll go down together. But David, there's no rush. That box has been waiting 6 years. It can wait another day, another week, however long you need. What's in it? Letters from your father, photos, personal items he wanted you to have, things that will answer questions about who he was, why he made the choices he made, what he hoped you'd become. More tests? No, Alexander said, just love, the complicated kind, the kind that comes with regrets and hopes and the knowledge that he'd never get to meet you. I looked down at my mother's letter, at her shaky handwriting and her fierce love and her absolute conviction that I'd be okay. Start small, she'd written. One thing that matters. I knew what that one thing was. Alexander, I said, I need you to do something for me. Something that has nothing to do with the portfolio or the board seats or any of this. Of course, I need you to find out everything you can about my wife, Elena Whitmore, her family's money, where it came from, how it's structured, what it's actually worth. He raised an eyebrow. May I ask why? Because she thinks she won, and I need to know exactly what she thinks she won before I decide what to do about it. Alexander smiled, small, knowing, the expression of someone who'd seen this play before and knew how it ended. Your mother would approve, he said. She always said the best revenge was understanding your opponent better than they understood themselves. This isn't revenge, isn't it? I thought about that, about Elena's casual cruelty, about 7 years of making me feel small, about being thrown out like trash while she celebrated with her someone. Maybe it is, I admitted, but the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't destroy, it just reveals. Those are the most satisfying ones, Alexander said. I'll have a full report by tomorrow morning. Everything, finances, properties, family history, business dealings, scandals, secrets. If it exists, we'll find it. Thank you. He moved toward the door, then paused. David, your mother spent 6 years preparing for this moment, planning every detail, anticipating every contingency, making sure you'd be protected and prepared. But there's one thing she couldn't plan for. What's that? What kind of man you'd choose to be with all this power? That's on you now. Choose well. He left me alone with my mother's letter and the weight of $1 billion and the question that would define everything that came next. Who was I going to be? The hotel suite felt different when I returned that evening. Not physically, it was still absurdly luxurious, still decorated with the kind of tasteful excess that whispered old money. But something in me had shifted during those hours in Alexander's office, reading my mother's final words, understanding for the first time what she'd actually given me. Not just money, freedom. I stood at the window watching London's lights flicker on as dusk settled over the city. Somewhere out there, Elena was probably having dinner with Marcus, laughing about how smoothly the divorce was proceeding, how grateful she was to be free of the husband who'd never quite measured up. She had no idea I was here, had no idea I'd been 3 rows behind her on the flight, had no idea that the broke, desperate man she'd discarded was standing in a suite that cost more per night than she'd given me to rebuild my entire life. My phone buzzed, a message from Alexander. Preliminary report attached, full analysis by morning, but these are the highlights. Call me if you have questions. I opened the attachment. Whitmore Family Financial Overview. Preliminary. Elena Margaret Whitmore, age 34. Primary residence, Manhattan, NY. Penthouse, Upper East Side. Estimated personal net worth, 8.2, which is $8 million. That was what Elena had, what her whole family had given her, the trust fund she'd lived off, the wealth that had made her feel entitled to judge everyone else's financial worth. $8 million. I owned property worth more than that, individual properties. The Paris apartment alone was worth almost 3 times her entire net worth. I kept reading. Source of wealth. Family trust fund established by grandfather. Harrison Whitmore. 8.2 M sum. No significant personal income or business ventures. Trust generates approximately $320K annually in distributions. Primary residence purchased by family trust, held in her name, family wealth, combined. Father Robert Whitmore, 42 M, real estate holdings, primarily commercial. Mother Catherine Whitmore, 18 M, inheritance from her family. Total family net worth, 68 million dollars. That was the entire Whitmore family fortune, the wealth that had made them feel superior, that had bought them into the right clubs and the right circles and the right zip codes. I had more than 10 times that. Just me, not my family, not a dynasty built over generations. Just what my father had left and my mother had protected. The report continued. Notable financial context. Family wealth has been relatively stagnant for 15 years. Several failed business ventures by Robert Whitmore resulted in significant losses. 2008-2012. Family social standing exceeds their actual financial position. Significant annual expenses, maintaining lifestyle, estimated $450K plus. Strained trust distributions. Elena's personal spending frequently exceeds her trust distributions, requiring family support. So the Whitmores were struggling. Not poor, they'd never be poor, but stretched. Living a lifestyle their money could barely support, maintaining appearances that cost more than they could actually afford, propped up by a trust fund that wasn't growing fast enough to keep pace with their spending. And Elena had married me thinking what? That I was dead weight? That I was costing her money she couldn't spare? That she needed to trade up to someone who could contribute financially instead of just existing on her generosity? The irony was almost painful. My phone rang. Alexander. Did you read it? He asked without preamble. I did. And I'm trying to figure out if I should laugh or feel sorry for her. Feel sorry for her, Alexander said. People who confuse social status with actual wealth often do. The Whitmores have been dining out on their name for a generation, but the money's thin. Elena probably genuinely believes she was supporting you, because in her world, $320K a year feels like real money. It is real money. To normal people, yes. To someone managing a billion-dollar portfolio, it's a rounding error. David, do you understand what I'm telling you? Elena Whitmore threw you out because she thought you were poor, because she believed she was rich and you were dragging her down. She has no idea, no possible way of knowing that you're worth more than her entire family combined. I sat down heavily on the couch. So what do I do with this information? That's entirely up to you. You could reveal it, show her exactly who she discarded. You could use it as leverage in the divorce, though I suspect you don't need to. Or you could do nothing. Let her think she won. Let her move on with her life, never knowing the truth. What would my mother want me to do? A long pause. Your mother would want you to be happy. Everything else is secondary. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. It's the only answer that matters. David, you're standing at a crossroads. One path is revenge, public, satisfying, and the kind of thing that would make Elena understand exactly what she lost. The other path is moving forward, building the life you want without looking back at the people who didn't deserve to be part of it. And if I want both, he laughed, then you're definitely your mother's son. She'd want both too. The question is, can you have revenge without it consuming you? Can you let Elena see the truth without letting that truth define your next chapter? I thought about my mother's letter. Start small. One thing that matters, making Elena suffer didn't matter. Not really. What mattered was building something with this freedom I'd been given. Something that would make the last 6 years of planning and protecting worth it. But letting her think she'd won. Letting her move through life believing she'd upgraded, believing I was the mistake she'd successfully corrected. That stuck in my throat like broken glass. There's something else in the report, Alexander said quietly. Page 3. You should read it. I scrolled down. Recent developments. Elena Whitmore has been in a relationship with Marcus Hendricks for approximately 8 months. Hendricks, age 36, investment banker. Personal net worth, $12 million. Relationship began while Elena was still married to David Chen. Evidence suggests financial motivation. Hendricks has been supporting several of Elena's expenses that exceeded her trust distributions. Hendricks recently proposed marriage last week. Wedding planned for spring 2026. The room tilted slightly. 8 months. She'd been cheating for 8 months, had probably started planning the divorce the moment she'd secured Marcus as her replacement. Someone with more money, better prospects, willing to subsidize the lifestyle her trust fund couldn't quite support. I hadn't been dumped because I wasn't exciting enough. I'd been dumped because someone richer had come along. David? Alexander's voice came through the phone. Are you still there? She's engaged, I said flatly. To the man she was cheating with, the man who's worth slightly more than her, just enough to solve her financial problems. Yes. So this was never about love or excitement or any of the reasons she gave me. It was just an upgrade, a financial transaction. It appears so. I thought about the letter she'd left on the pillow, about how she'd needed someone who excited her, who challenged her, who made her feel alive, about how I'd been too comfortable, too safe, too settled. All lies, pretty lies designed to make the betrayal feel like something other than what it was. A cold calculation about who could better fund her lifestyle. Alexander, I said slowly, I'm going to need that full report as soon as possible. I thought you might. It'll be ready by morning. And one more thing. Can you find out where Elena's staying in London? What she's doing here? A pause. I can, but David, what are you planning? I don't know yet, I said honestly, but I think it's time Elena Whitmore met the real David Chen, not the broke husband she discarded, not the grateful recipient of her charity, the actual person I am now. And who is that? I looked around the suite, at the life my mother had built for me in secret, at the freedom my father had died to give me, at the choice that was finally, completely mine. I guess we're all about to find out. The full report arrived at 6:00 a.m. I'd been awake since 4, unable to sleep, my mind churning through possibilities and scenarios and the strange arithmetic of revenge. How much was enough? How far was too far? Where was the line between justice and cruelty, between revealing the truth and weaponizing it? My phone lit up with Alexander's message. Full analysis attached. Also, Elena is staying at Claridge's, room 507. She has dinner reservations tonight at the Ledbury, 8:00 p.m. Table for 2. Thought you might want to know. I opened the report. It was thorough, devastating really, in its clinical dissection of Elena's life and choices. Whitmore Family Financial Law Analysis. Complete. The first section covered what I already knew. The trust fund, the stagnant wealth, the lifestyle that exceeded their means. But then it got interesting. Marcus Hendricks. Detailed profile. Background. Investment banker at Rothschild & Co. Annual salary, $850K base plus bonus, average 1.2 M total. Personal net worth, 12 primarily stock portfolio and real estate. Recently purchased engagement ring, 180K, financed, not paid outright. So Marcus wasn't as wealthy as he appeared either. Was carrying debt to maintain appearances, just like the Whitmores. The engagement ring alone, financed instead of purchased, told me everything I needed to know about his actual liquidity. Relationship timeline, January 2025. First documented contact at charity gala. February 2020, regular dinner meetings. Elena's credit cards show 15 plus expensive restaurant charges. March 2020, first evidence of affair, hotel room charge to Elena's card. Full October 2020, escalating relationship while Elena remained married. October 15th, 2025, Marcus proposed. October 19th, 2025, Elena initiated divorce proceedings. She'd waited, had secured the proposal first, made sure Marcus was committed, then pulled the trigger on ending our marriage. Clinical, calculated. The kind of strategic thinking people applied to hostile takeovers, not relationships. Financial arrangements. Marcus has been supplementing Elena's expenses since April 2025. Estimated $8K a month in additional support, dinners, travel, shopping. Elena's trust distributions insufficient to maintain her lifestyle without supplementation. Marcus appears to believe Elena's family is wealthier than they actually are. That last line made me pause. Marcus thought he was marrying serious money, thought the Whitmore name came with Whitmore wealth, probably assumed Elena's trust fund was just the visible portion of a much larger fortune. He had no idea she was essentially broke by the standards of the world they moved in. No idea that $320K a year sounded impressive until you tried to maintain a Manhattan penthouse and a luxury lifestyle on it. They were both lying to each other about money. How perfectly appropriate. Current London trip. Purpose, pre-wedding planning, meeting with the luxury vendors. Marcus joined Elena in London on Sunday. Separate flight, separate hotel. They're maintaining separate accommodations for propriety. Elena's word to hotel staff. Wedding venue scouting scheduled for Tuesday, Thursday. So they were here planning a wedding while my divorce papers were still warm. While I was supposed to be scrambling to find a place to live, a job to survive, a life to rebuild from the ashes she'd left me with. The fury that swept through me was clean and cold. I called Alexander. "You've read it," he said, not a question. "I need you to do something for me. Something that might seem petty. I specialized in petty for 40 years before I discovered ethics. Try me. I want a reservation at the Ledbury tonight. Best table in the house. 8 o'clock. A long pause. "David, I'm not going to make a scene, Naomi. I'm not going to confront her. I just want her to see me. Want her to wonder how the broke husband she threw out is dining at one of the most expensive restaurants in London 3 days after she left him with $700. And then? And then nothing. I'll eat dinner, pay with the card you gave me. Let her see it happen. Let her mind work on that mystery for a while." Another pause. "Your mother would tell you this is a bad idea." My mother left me $1 billion specifically so I could make my own choices. This is my choice. "Fair enough, I'll have the reservation made. Should I arrange for company? You'll look odd dining alone." He was right. Showing up solo would seem sad, desperate, like I was trying too hard. But bringing someone, "Can you join me?" I asked. "As my lawyer, my advisor, whatever story we need, just someone who makes it look like I'm there for business, not revenge." "I'd be delighted. I haven't had a front row seat to one of these situations in years." "The Ledbury at 8 then. Wear the navy suit you brought. It'll photograph well if there are any Society Pages people there." Photograph? "David, you're about to have dinner at one of London's finest restaurants while your ex-wife does the same thing with her affair partner. If anyone recognizes the situation, it will absolutely end up in someone's social media feed. Just be aware." I hadn't thought about that, about witnesses, about documentation, about the way the world loved watching rich people's drama play out. "Maybe this is a bad idea," I said. "It's a terrible idea," Alexander agreed cheerfully. "But terrible ideas are often the most instructive. You want to see how revenge feels before you commit to it. This is a relatively harmless way to test those waters. Worst case, you have an excellent meal and Elena experiences mild confusion. Best case, you learn something about what you actually want from this situation." "What do you think I want?" "I think you want her to know she made a mistake, to see that you're not who she thought you were, to feel, even briefly, the regret of having underestimated you." He was right. That's exactly what I wanted. 8 o'clock, I confirmed. "I'll be ready." The navy suit fit perfectly. My mother had apparently known my measurements years ago and had the foresight to stock the Tribeca apartment accordingly. It was understated but expensive, the kind of thing that didn't scream wealth but quietly indicated it to people who knew how to look. I studied myself in the mirror. Same face as always. Same David Chen who'd woken up Saturday morning thinking he had $700 in a failed marriage. But something in my posture was different. Shoulders back, chin up, the body language of someone who belonged in expensive places, who didn't need to apologize for existing. Fake it until you make it, except I wasn't faking anymore. I actually could afford this, actually belonged in the world Elena had always treated as hers alone. Alexander picked me up at 7:30 in a car that was notably nicer than the one we'd used yesterday. "Escalation?" I asked as I slid in. "Presentation. If Elena sees you arrive, it should be memorable. This is a Bentley, by the way. Your father had several. This one's been in storage waiting for you to claim it." "I own a Bentley?" "You own 4 Bentleys, 2 Rolls Royces, and a rather alarming number of other vehicles scattered across your various properties. Your father liked cars. Your mother thought it was ridiculous, but let him have his toys." The restaurant was in Notting Hill, upscale without being pretentious, the kind of place where Michelin stars were earned through excellence rather than showmanship. We arrived at exactly 8 p.m. Elena's reservation, according to Alexander's intelligence, was for 8:15. Strategic timing, he murmured as we were led to our table. Center of the room, impossible to miss. Perfectly positioned to see everyone who entered. She'll walk in, scan the room as people do, and see you mid-conversation with a distinguished older gentleman. She'll spend the entire evening trying to figure out what's happening. Is this cruel? I asked as we sat down. Is it cruel to exist in a public space? Is it cruel to have dinner with your lawyer? You're not doing anything to her, David. You're simply living your life. If she finds that disturbing, well, that's rather the point, isn't it? The menu arrived. Woensbond, no prices listed, always a sign of a place that catered to people who didn't need to think about cost. I ordered without looking at what things might total, a small rebellion against years of being the person who'd calculated every expense. At 8:17 p.m., Elena walked in. She was stunning as always. Black dress, perfectly cut, jewelry that caught the light just right, hair done professionally, makeup flawless, the complete picture of a woman who'd spent hours preparing to be looked at. Marcus was with her, tall, handsome in that generic banker way, expensive suit, confident smile. They looked like an advertisement for luxury, for success, for having won at life. Elena scanned the room as predicted. Her eyes landed on me. I watched the recognition hit, the double take, the confusion, the moment of trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what she believed should be true. I was supposed to be in New York, broke, scrambling. Not here in London, at the Ledbury, dressed in a suit that cost more than she'd left me, dining with a distinguished older man who radiated the kind of authority that came from decades of managing serious money. I smiled, raised my wine glass slightly in acknowledgement, then turned back to Alexander as if she was barely worth noticing. "She's seen you," Alexander murmured, "and she's rattled." Her hand just went to Marcus's arm, seeking reassurance. "He has no idea who you are, of course. Is probably asking her what's wrong." "Should I feel good about this?" I asked quietly. "Do you?" I considered it, examined the feeling in my chest. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. More like validation. Proof that I existed outside her narrative about me. Evidence that her story, broke husband, lucky to have had her, properly discarded, wasn't the only truth available. "I don't know," I admitted. "Ask me after dinner." We ate slowly, course after course of food that deserved attention and contemplation. Alexander told stories about my father, about deals made and opportunities seized, about the man who had built a fortune and hidden it from the world. And the entire time, I could feel Elena's gaze periodically drifting to our table, could feel her trying to figure out the puzzle, trying to understand how the husband she'd left with nothing was here, now apparently fine. The bill came in a leather folder. I pulled out the black card Alexander had given me, Providence Holdings embossed in subtle lettering. "That's going to confuse her even more," Alexander noted with amusement. "A corporate card suggests you're here on business, which you are, technically. The business of learning who you are." We stood to leave. I didn't look at Elena's table, didn't acknowledge her again. Just walked out with Alexander, letting my presence speak for itself. On the sidewalk, waiting for the car, I finally let myself breathe. "Well?" Alexander asked. "How does revenge feel?" "Small," I said. "Smaller than I thought it would." "That's because it's not enough. Real revenge, the kind your mother believed in, isn't about moments. It's about trajectory. It's about building a life so complete that everyone who doubted you has to watch you thrive." The Bentley pulled up. We got in. And as we drove away, I looked back at the Ledbury, at the restaurant where Elena was probably still sitting, mind racing, trying to understand what she'd just seen. Let her wonder, I thought. Let her question. Let her start to suspect that maybe, just maybe, she didn't know me at all. The real reveal would come later, when I was ready, when the truth would hurt most. My phone rang at 11:00 p.m. Unknown number, London area code. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press accept. "David?" Elena's voice, strained, uncertain. Nothing like the confident woman who'd thrown me out 4 days ago. Was that you at dinner tonight?" I said nothing, let the silence stretch. David, I know it was you. What are you doing in London? How are you? How did you? She stopped, started again. Who was that man you were with? A business associate, I said calmly. What business? You don't have, you didn't mention any, you never asked. Another pause. I could hear her breathing, could picture her pacing in whatever expensive hotel room she was staying in, mind racing through possibilities that didn't quite make sense. The divorce papers, she said finally. You haven't signed them. I've been busy. Busy with what? David, what's going on? I thought about telling her, thought about laying it all out, the inheritance, the properties, the $1 billion she'd never known existed. Thought about the look on her face when she realized what she'd thrown away. But that would be too easy, too quick. Revenge that burned fast left nothing but ash. I'm figuring some things out, I said, about who I am, what I want, where I'm going. That's very cryptic. Is it? You told me I needed to be more exciting. I'm working on it. I could hear Marcus's voice in the background, asking who she was talking to. Heard Elena move to another room, closing a door. David, this is ridiculous. We're getting divorced. You can't show up in London and what are you trying to prove? I'm not trying to prove anything, Elena. I'm just living my life. Apparently in some of the same spaces you live yours. London's a big city. Funny we'd run into each other. That wasn't running into each other. That was you at the Ledbury at the same time as you. I had no idea you'd be there. How would I? I don't keep track of your schedule anymore. That privilege ended when you threw me out. The words landed hard. I heard her sharp intake of breath. I didn't throw you out. I asked you to leave. There's a difference, Ramarito. Is there? Felt pretty similar from where I was standing. David, sign the papers, Elena. Send them to my lawyer. I'll review them when I'm ready. Until then, enjoy London. Enjoy Marcus. Enjoy your exciting new life. Your lawyer? You have a lawyer now? Everyone should have a lawyer. You taught me that. I hung up before she could respond, and for the first time since Saturday morning, I smiled. Not because I'd hurt her, though I had a little, but because I'd finally stopped letting her define the story.